Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. By dividing the magic power in the mercury glass rod into 7 levels of different concentrations, and then slowly adjusting and stirring at a uniform speed, allowing rainbow liquid of different colors to adhere to different concentrations of magic power, the 7 colors of the rainbow liquid could be separated into 7 layers of single colors. Of course, theory was theory, and practice was practice. Although Vert was very confident in his magical talent, his current state wasn't good. To prevent mistakes, he slowed down as much as possible. When Vert started stirring, Dark raised his head. The sudden surge of effort from the hero's son was actually quite surprising to him. He just didn't know to what extent he could achieve it. Vert on the podium had already successfully divided the magic power concentration into 7 levels, but what came next was the key. Maintaining a continuous output of magic power and stable control of magic power concentration, while stirring the mercury glass rod at a uniform speed, was extremely difficult. Among the first-year students, only Dark could do it easily. Next would be the earnest Emma and Saraswati from the Magic House. Professor Thompson had originally intended to call Dark up to demonstrate, but unexpectedly, Vert raised his hand first. Since it was the hero's son who raised his hand, Professor Thompson still gave him considerable trust even though he hadn't performed well in the first month of school. Fortunately, although Vert was doing it slower than he had anticipated, he was indeed using the correct method. This made him slightly change his view of this hero's son. A few minutes later, the rainbow liquid in the beaker was finally separated into 7 layers from top to bottom. Sunlight slanted in, dreamlike and illusionary. Success. Vert breathed a heavy sigh of relief. I succeeded, Professor. But as he turned his head in surprise to look at Professor Thompson, the magic power poured into the mercury glass rod instantly lost control, and the 7 colors that had just been separated mixed together again. He was stunned. Clap. 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 Applause came from his ears. It was Professor Thompson's encouragement. Well done, Gold, 5 points added. Overjoyed, Vert practically grinned as he stepped down. Now, the gap between me and Dark should have narrowed a bit, right? But just as he was about to sit down, he heard Professor Thompson's stern reprimand again. I mentioned it from the first class, sleeping is absolutely not allowed in my classroom. Bro, hey, I'm 10 points deducted. The class bell rang. Vert silently woke Robert, who had slept for almost half the class. What's wrong? Vert. Is class starting? Yeah, class is starting, the second session. Oh right, Robert. What is it? I scored 15 more points than you. The second class was summoning art. Robert, who had just woken up, didn't cause any more trouble. But the duo quickly realized that cramming at the last minute was useless. In this class, even though neither of them fell asleep, they still gained nothing. Luckily, they weren't deducted any points. After class, the two sat in the classroom, summarizing their situation. 75 plus 20 plus 20 to 5 to 10 plus 20 equals 120, still 40 points short. Vert sighed deeply. He really felt it was too difficult. They had clearly already tried hard, why was it still not working? Robert was also exceptionally dejected. After so many failures, he no longer had his previous ease and... In despair, Robert said helplessly, Vert, how about, we try to talk it over with Emma? Vert turned his head to look at him, his bloodshot eyes widening. Are you kidding me? Have you forgotten how you were cursing her a couple of days ago? It was just a few words. Robert said guiltily, she'll forgive us. Vert couldn't help but cover his head, collapsing. What are you even thinking? Get it straight, we're already irreconcilable. Robert, but... The light in Vert's eyes regathered, gradually brightening. No buts. Debts must be paid, it's the law of nature. I won't run away. And, there's still a chance. Let's go, we'll play another round of magic chess. Robert was immediately shocked. Still playing magic chess? Vert, play. Why not play? One more game and then sleep, I haven't slept for 30 hours. Robert, let's go eat first, Anyway, there are no more classes today. Vert, alright then. The two went to the cafeteria, ordered some dishes, and sat down. Robert ate a lot. But Vert had little appetite. He noticed that the people around them were looking at him strangely, and subconsciously tidied his messy hair. It was also at this moment that students from all four houses simultaneously received a notification. Astronomy class was starting. Secret technique, myriad recommendations returned to 1. Chapter 36, Dark Demon's inaugural astrology lesson. Astronomy was essentially an elective course, with class times entirely dependent on Professor Didi's arrangements. Although the schedule stated 19:30 to 21:00, the actual time was often adjusted. For example, today's astronomy class was scheduled to begin at 18:00 in the evening. Given that there were no classes on Wednesday afternoons, most students weren't in a rush. After receiving the notification, they simply discussed it quietly for a while, speculating about what Professor Didi would teach in astronomy. However, astronomy's connection to daily life was truly too tenuous, even more intangible than the magic they had personally experienced. Students could only rely on their imaginations and divergent thinking, and their inspiration mostly came from legends and stories. Vert and Robert didn't have such leisure. The two of them suddenly became anxious. It wasn't that they were thinking about previewing the material, there wasn't even a textbook for astronomy. Furthermore, after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, their debt would double, reaching a staggering 320 credit points. With only 120 credit points currently, it was impossible to earn the remaining 200 from the next 3 classes. So, they had completely given up on the idea of earning credit points from classes. Robert just wanted to lie down and wait for death. Vert, on the other hand, placed his hopes on the intra-class competition in Friday's dueling class. The champion's reward for the intra-class competition was a full 1,000 credit points. If he could win this prize money before 1 o'clock on Friday afternoon, repaying their debt would be a piece of cake. Vert's original plan was to start using his Mystic Beast for dueling practice from tonight to increase his chances of winning. Now, not only was his evening time occupied, but his time for catching up on sleep was also reduced. Wait, speaking of Mystic Beast. Vert couldn't help but look at Robert and mutter, "Robert, magical theory is tomorrow morning, where's your Mystic Beast?" Robert's expression gradually shifted from anxiety to panic. Dark Demon was in the library. Among the first-year students, there were 4 who spent the majority of their spare time in the library. One was Dark, one was Emma, one was Sarah, and the other was an unknown student from the Fool's Academy. Exactly 1 from each academy. They were essentially the top students of their respective academies, the pinnacle of wisdom. After receiving the notification about the astronomy class, Dark thought about finding some astronomy books to read. Because astronomy was an elective course without a final exam, he was quite casual when choosing books. Astronomical Symbols. Deciphering the Starry Sky. These 2 books piqued his interest. He pulled them both out and carried them back to his desk in the reading room. His attention was drawn to Astronomical Symbols because he saw a circle of symbols on its cover, one of which was exactly that had appeared on the Arrogance emblem. "I see, this is the symbol for the sun." Dark drew a circle on the paper and then added a dot in the center, lost in thought. "The Arrogant star's symbol is the sun. It doesn't seem so unacceptable. The sun is the central celestial body of the solar system. The 8 major planets, asteroids, meteors, comets, Kuiper belt objects, and interstellar dust in the solar system all revolve around the sun. And the sequence level of arrogance is 1, which perfectly matches the number symbolizing the center. If I remember correctly, one of Evi's evolutionary forms possesses the power of the sun. This is a point of reference. How to connect the sun with arrogance? Perhaps it will help me analyze the great sin of arrogance." Unknowingly, it was already 5 in the afternoon. Dark ate some pastries for sustenance in the refreshment room and drank a cup of unflavored black tea. Then packed up his things and left the library. Today, he was still extracting arrogance for storage, aiming to accumulate as many credit points as possible before Friday afternoon. Then, he would exchange them for a longer-lasting container and return the thought bottle to Professor Casel. Passing by Emma, Dark happened to glance at her and noticed she seemed to be studying the value of currency. This made Dark slightly surprised, feeling like this girl might be going astray. Thinking of her previous arguments with Vert and Robert about credit point debts, Dark couldn't help but shake his head. The astronomy classroom was located in the spiral clock tower at the center of Street Marion Castle. Climbing up the external spiral staircase, all the way to the 12th floor, one could reach Professor Didi's astronomy classroom. If you didn't arrive early, it was easy to be late. Dark was somewhat grateful for his consistently good habit of arriving at classrooms early. This class was still a joint class for all 4 academies. Students from the Magic Guidance Academy were clearly more interested in astronomy. Before dark arrived, many people were already excitedly whispering in the classroom. Professor Didi was generally a very amiable pixie. As the dean of the Fools Academy, even when deducting points from students, she never got angry in the slightest. And as soon as class was over, she became very approachable. Even if students were chattering in the classroom like they were now, she wouldn't mind. Yes, Professor Didi was already sitting at the podium. 6 o'clock sharp. The bell did not ring. Instead, a resonant chime symbolizing the alternation of day and night echoed. Duang. The bell sound reverberated throughout the campus. Sunset, moonrise. On the gradually darkening spiral staircase, Vert and Robert bounded upwards like rabbits. The two had set their alarms and woken up just in time, but they had lingered in bed for another 10 minutes before rushing out of the dormitory in a hurry. Naturally, they hadn't eaten breakfast. Of course, they hadn't slept well either. The late-night game of magical chess had cost them precious sleep time. Running on an empty stomach, sprinting to arrive just in time, only made their fatigue even more profound. It's over. The despairing bell sound struck their hearts. Bang. The two burst through the classroom door and stumbled inside. 5 points deducted each. Godin pro hey Professor Didi didn't even turn her head to look at them, and began drawing a moon on the blackboard. This lesson, she was clearly preparing to talk about astronomy knowledge related to the moon. Vert and Robert sheepishly slipped into the classroom and sat down in another corner at the back row. As for the deducted credit points, the two no longer cared so much. Anyway, they couldn't gather enough anymore, could they? Ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Since it was the first astronomy class for the first-year students, Professor Didi didn't teach anything too profound. When the class entered the second half, she suddenly waved her hand, and the classroom ceiling instantly became transparent. It was as if it had turned into a water mirror, shortening the distance to the night sky. Students had never observed the moon at such close range. Above the dark night sky rippling with water like waves, a full moon occupying their entire field of vision hung down, like a jade plate. Wow! The originally dull atmosphere vanished completely. The classroom instantly became lively. Professor Didi looked at the children, pointing and exclaiming at the full moon with a gentle expression, this time without any reprimand. But there were two people who, looking at the extremely close full moon, couldn't suppress the surging emotions in their hearts. One was Dark. The other was Vert. Chapter 37, Vert Gold walks into the abyss. By the time astronomy class ended, the night was deep and black. Only a round moon hung high, its moonlight pure and bright. Only then did the students realize, tonight was a full moon. Dark Damon walked along a narrow path, keeping far away from the crowds. He needed to find a deserted corner to calm down. St. Marian's castle was a maze of passages, and at night, golems patrolled. He avoided the golems and found a windowed alcove nearby. He squeezed inside, sat sideways on the windowsill, and tilted his head to see the full moon in the night sky. On the clock tower, suddenly facing the full moon at close range had caused his emotions to surge uncontrollably, a slight heat rising within him. The root cause was undoubtedly lust, at work. The lust +1, slowly drifting across his vision, made him realize that the moon was indeed a symbol of lust. Before this, he had never imagined that the connection between the 7 deadly sins and the stars could be so close. Sins called the source of all evil. Stars revered as the origin of all gods. Why could they be linked together? What exactly was the essence of sin? Human thought is a kind of motion. Once it starts, it's hard to stop. Dark's gaze shifted, and he suddenly noticed a figure flash across the outer bridge on the lower level. It seemed someone else was like him, unable to bear the loneliness of the night. Vert Gold confirmed that he had reached a crossroads in his life. He had previously transferred his academic points to Robert, leaving him with only 30 points. Robert, having received 100 points, was finally able to go to Professor Kazel to purchase the Magic Beast crafting materials sold in 100-point portions. It was said that the crafting materials for Magic Beast were actually quite expensive, and the time frame to buy them with 100 points was limited to this beginner stage. There was only one night left before the next magic engineering class, and tonight was Robert's last chance. This was originally a critical moment, and Vert should have been by Robert's side, assisting him with his assignment. But he had slipped out while Robert went to find Professor Kazel. This was Vert's first time wandering out alone at night. The excessively large castle, when he was alone, inevitably produced a sense of desolation and gloom. Vert was considered brave, but he couldn't help but hug his arms and shiver. It wasn't until he arrived at an outer bridge and focused his attention on the 2-finger-thick black leather book in his hands that the chilling feeling gradually subsided. After confirming that the moonlight could shine directly on it, Vert, bathed in moonlight, opened the book cover. What came into view was a short sentence: walk into the abyss, gaze into the abyss, As the moonlight landed on the words, the originally smooth text suddenly trembled in Vert's vision, and then transformed into another kind of writing, one he had never seen before, yet could understand. Part the mists, behold the truth, the full moon will guide you. He had obtained this book, Walk into the Abyss. On the second day of enrollment, during his first visit to the library. To complete the summoning arts class assignment, he was searching for information about the Minotaur. He found this Walk into the Abyss hidden in a corner. After Robert confirmed that only he could see the text change. Should he call it surprise, or a sense of destiny? Vert felt a strong sense of being chosen. His surname was Goad, and his bloodline was said to originate from the legendary hero. But in reality, apart from the initial welcome and congratulations from the students, he couldn't feel anything special about being the son of the hero. Until he discovered this book. Full moon. A word that was itself enchanting. More than a month of carefree fun had made him almost forget this book hidden in his drawer. It wasn't until tonight in astronomy class, when he directly faced the full moon at close range, that Vert remembered this book. Unable to suppress the excitement in his heart, he finally came here with the book. When the moonlight shone on the page for about 15 seconds, the transformed text changed again. Pink mist rose and gathered into the shape of Kama, giving him a guide to the path. Vert was overjoyed and immediately ran following the guidance of Dot. Upstairs, Dark, still sitting sideways by the window, happened to witness everything. Naturally, he also saw the pink arrow that only certain people could see. His expression gradually became strange. Should I follow him? Or simply ignore it? If it were yesterday, Dark would have definitely pretended not to see anything. But tonight, his heart was restless. He took out his house card, injected a trace of magic, and summoned his demi-devimon. Go, follow him. Yes, master. The demi-devimon immediately spread its wings and flew down. Dark also jumped down from inside and quickly walked towards the bridge downstairs. With a house card in hand, he could clearly know wherever the demi-devimon flew. Once across the bridge, he was no longer in a hurry. He maintained a fixed distance, closely following behind without being able to see Vert at all, walking at a leisurely pace. Time had moved to 9:30 in the evening. Apart from the clumsy golems, there wasn't a single person to be seen in the castle. He continued tracking for over 10 minutes. Vert was still walking forward, but Dark suddenly heard footsteps behind him. His mind raced, and he quickly hid behind a statue of an unknown archmage, pressing himself tightly against it. The archmage's wide robes successfully concealed his entire body. Slightly hurried footsteps passed by. Only when the sound completely disappeared did Dark exhale lightly and slowly step out from behind the statue. Just then, the house card suddenly vibrated. Not long after, the demi-devimon flew back. It lost him. He seemed to have noticed me, then suddenly quickened his pace, and disappeared around a corner. The demi-devimon explained in a rambling, aggrieved tone. Dark chuckled and nodded. He didn't see you, did he? It wasn't unexpected that the demi-devimon would lose him. After all, he was the son of the hero, he was bound to have some unknown special traits, perhaps even the legendary sixth sense or seventh sense. The question was, had the demi-devimon's appearance been seen? The demi-devimon shook its head frantically. Absolutely, positively, and definitely, no one saw me. Good that he didn't see you. Dark started walking back. Originally, there wasn't any real need to keep tracking him. He didn't take the matter too seriously. St. Marian's was full of uncertainties. The castle's history was too ancient, and the secrets it held were too old. Too many people had forgotten history. When the deep-seated secrets surfaced, the dust of history would eventually settle. And truth always comes with mist. Who will unveil the mist? Who can grasp the truth? The hero is here. Chapter 38, Street Marian's problematic youth romantic comedy. Vert Gold cautiously pushed aside the tapestry and slipped out from within the wall. Just now, he had vaguely sensed someone tracking him from behind. He hadn't expected that as soon as he turned a corner, the pink arrow would point directly at the wall. The characters for magic power coalesced above the arrow. He reached out with his left hand, pouring magic power into it. The wall rippled like water. Gritting his teeth, he plunged in and found himself in an extremely hidden secret passage. Along both sides of the passage, torches were placed every few meters. As someone approached, the torches would whoosh to life, illuminating the passage. The passage was winding with many forks, sometimes meandering like a snake, sometimes undulating up and down. As his senses gradually became confused, Vert couldn't tell whether he was going down or up. After much difficulty, he finally emerged, only to be greeted by the same monotonous scenery of the castle. Taking a few more steps, he entered another secret passage. After repeating this several times, Vert was completely lost. As the mist on the book pages gradually dissipated, the arrow became blurred and Into the Abyss returned to silence. Vert felt like he had been played. It took a full half-hour before Vert, covered in dust and grime, finally escaped from the maze-like castle and returned to the Knights Academy common room. Robert was still working on his Mystic Beast. A classmate from the same year happened to be interested and offered him a few pointers. Perhaps because he understood the difficulty and preciousness of accumulating credit points, Robert was extremely cautious. Every step was slow, and the crafting process was relatively smooth. Now, he had reached the most crucial and difficult step, drawing the number 1 magic circle. Vert watched silently, not daring to interrupt. However, when drawing this magic circle, which even Diana could successfully complete, Robert appeared unusually nervous. As a result, his fingers trembled, the pen tip slipped, and he drew it wrong. Don't be nervous, Robert, you can still continue. Vert quickly rushed over and steadied his hand. Robert was drenched in cold sweat, but with Vert's help, he managed to stop the pen and continue drawing the lines. Although the extra stroke was very conspicuous, he finally completed the entire number 1 magic circle. The magic circle successfully glowed. Robert trembled nervously, fumbling several times before successfully picking up the Mystic Beast's fur and placing it into the light. As the fur was gradually engulfed by the golden light of the number 1 magic circle, the light became increasingly brighter. Golden thread separated from the number 1 magic circle, wrapping around and enveloping the magic card layer by layer. Finally, a golden cocoon was formed. Vert said, "There's one more step, Robert, input magic power, and also think more about things you like." Robert reached out and pressed his hand on the golden cocoon, slowly injecting magic power. "Things I like? Magical chess?" The magic card emerged from the cocoon. Robert excitedly picked up the magic card, the result of the two brothers' 3 days of hard work. The originally blurry, transparent outline on the card face immediately began to change after catching his gaze. It was neither Ron Weasley's Patronus Jack Russell Terrier from Harry Potter, nor Ron's pet rat Scabbers, but from Magical Chess, the eternally immovable castle. Card name, Mystic Beast. Type, Spirit card. Rarity, Common Race, Elemental. Attribute, Ground. Magic power, 300. Attack, 0. Defense, 300. Ultimate skill, Fortify. When Robert summoned his Mystic Beast castle, everyone was stunned. In Magical Chess, the castle was equivalent to the player's life, occupying a fixed 3x3 grid, possessing 10 times the HP of a single piece, and capable of using its unique skill, Fortify, to have the damage taken in the next turn. Once the castle was captured, the player would be declared defeated. And Robert's Mystic Beast castle was also a massive 3 meters by 3 meters by 3 meters cube. As soon as it was summoned, it gave people a sense of solid, unshakable stability. "Wow! Robert, you did it!" Vert thumped Robert's shoulder, surprised and delighted. Robert was also so excited that his neck turned red. He exclaimed, "Come here, my castle, let me take a good look at you." Castle Chan didn't budge an inch. After several attempts, Robert's face turned pale. Someone suddenly said, "What's so surprising, Robert? Castles in Magical Chess can't move, isn't that common sense?" "Ha ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. Sorry, I couldn't help it, ha 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 ha." That night, Robert dreamed that he had transformed into a majestic castle, but was gradually driven to despair as a group of big-toothed rats gnawed at him from the corners of the walls, bit by bit, until he finally collapsed with a roar. And Vert also had a dream. He dreamed of the library administrator. That upperclassman Senior. He dreamed of strolling with Senior in the academy's backyard where lilies bloomed. Thursday seemed to bring everything back to a normal pace. Vert and Robert both reverted to their usual selves. The 3-minute burst of enthusiasm for studying was gone, replaced by a slightly more rule-abiding attitude than before. They would avoid Emma after class. And Emma had no intention of paying them any attention at all. Dark continued to earn credit points, accumulating them for his weekend shopping trip to Travelers Street. By the way, substitute teaching earned him 200 points. Dark had always felt that his vertical calculation method was undercredited, and he argued his case. Professor Lily then added another 150 points for him. So, earning credit points was really easy. After magical history class in the afternoon, Dark headed to the library as usual. People do grow, and he could now walk past upperclassman Pandora without batting an eyelid. But after walking a distance, he suddenly turned back and saw Vert awkwardly striking up a conversation with Senior. This made him realize something, and he couldn't help but smile faintly, still calm and unconcerned. Arithmetic class had assigned new homework. Whenever this happened, Diana and Rose would come to pester him. Dark looked at the two little girls sitting obediently across from his desk, feeling a little helpless. By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Diana finally finished the last piece of homework. With a wow. She leaned back in her chair, puffed out her chest and stretched her arms, the little white rabbits hidden beneath her thin school uniform eager to jump out. Having completed her task, Diana became restless. She stealthily fished out a flower card from her card holder, painted with black roses in gouache style, and slid it across the table towards Dark. "Hey, Dark, want to try this fortune-telling card? I heard it's very accurate, Dark." Dark looked up and glanced at it, casually saying, "Love fortune-telling? So you knew." Diana was like a kitten caught stealing dried fish, and slowly slid the "love fortune-telling" card back. "It's not like I'm completely oblivious to the world outside." Dark found it a bit amusing. He then asked, "Where did you girls get these flower cards from?" "Eh?" Diana thought for a moment. "One was a free gift when buying candy, and this one was slipped into the door crack when I went out this morning." Dark frowned slightly. "Someone is distributing these flower cards? Could you lend me this card?" Diana immediately said happily, "Of course." Chapter 39, Dark Demon Doesn't Understand Love. Dark examined the flower card closely after receiving it. For these things to become popular, they couldn't be shoddy products. The flower card itself was made of a material similar to magic cards, and the painted flowers were lifelike, giving the impression that they might bloom at any moment. Diana's flower card had a cherry blossom design, while the one in Dark's hand was a black rose. Additionally, Professor Lily's flower card was a blue enchantress rose. Dark had glimpsed that Emma's flower card was a lily. Cherry blossoms are symbols of love and hope, representing elegant, simple, and pure affection. Black roses symbolize desperate love, filled with hatred and curses, wanting to possess the beloved. Blue enchantress roses represent pure love, sincere and kind prayers for miracles to come, for impossible things to happen. As for lilies, they imply lasting union, containing deep blessings for family and love. These flower cards, using various different flower types, not only imbued each card with different meanings but also added an extra element of collectability. Beyond their exquisite appearance, the flower cards themselves also had excellent functions. By injecting magic power, one could make the flowers come alive, even emitting faint floral fragrances. Especially the divination to see the person you love in your heart. And even the person loved by the person you love. For St. Marian's students in their adolescence, this was simply too attractive. Dark pondered for a moment, inputted a trace of magic power, and with a gentle flick, the black rose on the card suddenly flew out, petals scattering in the wind. He reached out and caught a black rose petal, feeling only a faint coolness before the black rose dissolved like water. He seemed to understand something, and suddenly looked up. Only to find himself eye to eye, nose to nose with Diana, who had leaned over without him noticing. A faint milky scent wafted into his nostrils. This child was secretly eating milk candy in the library. Having exposed Diana's transgression, Dark immediately pressed her forehead and pushed her away. Diana retreated unhappily, but her eyes were still fixed on the love divination card in Dark's hand. Dark didn't mind, he also wanted to see who exactly was his inner beloved. But what appeared on the card was an EV. Eh? Diana widened her eyes in surprise. Dark shook his head and smiled. It seemed this love divination card wasn't so reliable after all. However, when he inputted magic power just now, he had noticed a strange sensation. "Can I have this?" Dark looked up and asked. Diana nodded quickly. "Dark, you really like your magic beast?" Dark nodded. "It is my first magic spirit card after all. But looking at it this way, this flower card so-called divination isn't really about lovers, it's probably using some kind of trick." "Is that so?" Diana tilted her head, then cheered up again. On the other side of the reading room, Vert chewed on his pen, working on his assignment with a furrowed brow. Robert was in even worse shape than him. The consequences of not paying attention in class were gradually fermenting. As the difficulty of the assignments increased day by day, problems finally arose that he couldn't solve no matter how hard he thought. Headache. Vert put down his pen and pulled out a flower card from the gap in his textbook. This flower card was a free gift when they purchased the magic chess set. The flower card was adorned with red lilacs, representing the sentiment of first love. He quietly injected magic power, and a fair and beautiful face appeared on the card. A young man's love is ignorant and innocent. From initially noticing her because she resembled his mother's profile, to gradually developing into longing, breaking free from the mold, becoming independent, caring for her simply because she was her. Especially after seeing her again today, he felt an even greater surge of restlessness. Robert glanced over and grumbled, "If you like her so much, just make a move." Vert blushed, about to say that he would be content just to catch a few more glimpses of her. But the beautiful face on the card suddenly stretched out a delicate tongue and licked the corner of her lips. "Ah!" Vert let out a startled cry. In the library, where silence was required, his scream immediately attracted the attention of many people. Robert whispered, "What's wrong?" "And nothing." Vert sat back down, his face flushed, and secretly clenched the flower card in his hand. "Let's stop working on the assignment for now. Let's go practice dueling. Tomorrow is our last hope." Robert had been waiting for this moment and quickly closed his books and assignments, stuffing them all into his bag. The two quickly left the library. When registering their departure time at the counter, Vert's heart almost jumped out of his chest. That evening, Dark finished his library time early. The strange sensation produced when he inputted magic power into the flower card was bothering him. But it wasn't convenient to experiment in the library. He could only return to his dorm first. When he walked out of the library, the sky had already turned dark. He raised his head to look at the night sky, discovering that the moon was still very round tonight. Once he arrived at his dorm, he locked the door, put down his bag, and took out the black rose flower card again. Something's not right. He placed the flower card on the table, knitted his brows in thought for a long time, and then took out a magic pen from his drawer. Using a magic pen as a medium to conduct magic power could relatively effectively avoid some dangers and also make observation more convenient. Dark took a small step back, stretched out his hand, and touched the flower card with the magic pen, then inputted magic power. Not just the trace he had used in the library, but continuous, sustained input. Soon, under the drive of magic power, the black rose on the card retreated towards the edges, and the person you love in your heart emerged on the card's surface. This time, what appeared was still Evie. But Dark just shifted his thought, and the Evie disappeared. Appearing on the card again was Valkyria Alvet, far away in the duchy. Alvet was surprisingly a gentle-looking blonde beauty. If it weren't for the statues of her all over the kingdom, people would probably think she was the darling daughter of some noble family. Dark shifted his thought again, and Alvet's portrait gradually disappeared. This time, Diana appeared on the card. Then Rose, Pandora, Professor Lily. Faces flashed across the card's surface one after another, and more magic power was inputted into the flower card. Suddenly, the black rose on the card unraveled, starting from the stamen, decomposing into slender black threads. Those black threads transformed into thorny vines, twisting and twining like small snakes. Dark abruptly lifted the magic pen, and those thorny black vines suddenly broke through the plane, truly growing snakeheads from their tips, swarming out and biting towards him. Small darts. 3 shark-headed syringes suddenly flew out, instantly blasting through the snakeheads, pinning the restless flower card to the table. Lust -1, Chapter 40, Dark and Vert go their separate ways. The words, Lust 1, floating across his vision made Dark realize his intuition was correct. This flower card could indeed absorb people's thoughts through the conduction of magic power. The so-called fortune-telling was merely extracting the person currently being thought of from the surface of one's thoughts. By imbuing the flower card with the concept of love fortune-telling, it guided people to naturally think of the person they were thinking about when using it, and then that person would appear on the card. Even the subsequent the person the beloved person loves was just self-perception. It was nothing more than such a small trick. Because it was inherently harmless, it wouldn't raise alarms. On the surface, it was just a very interesting little toy. But now it seemed, it wasn't as simple as it appeared. Dark used his magic pen to probe again, confirming that the black rose flower card was indeed damaged. He then took out his notebook and began to record. 1. Flower cards can absorb people's thoughts through the conduction of magic power. 2. There must be people who have accidentally input excessive magic power, but no one has given feedback so far, indicating that this flower card only has a special reaction to the magic power of a few people, and for now, that's just me. 3. Flower cards can absorb great sins, indicating that their origin sequence is extremely high. 4. The person who can create this kind of flower card must possess a considerable level of skill. 5. Desired. No matter who created this flower card and for what purpose, the fact that it could absorb the power of lust would not change. If he could collect a sufficient number of flower cards, he could then boldly attempt to raise lust to over 100, in order to create Lust series magic cards. His heart became restless. Greed was somewhat spiraling out of control. Dark calmed his mind, tidied up the remnants of the flower card, and sealed them in a plastic bag. At the same time, Vert and Robert were practicing dueling in the castle corridor. Vert's mystic beast was a light attribute stag. Standing upright, it was a full 2 meters tall, and its magnificent antlers, forked like branches, gave it a significantly higher attack power than ordinary mystic beasts. But as the essence of a mystic beast, its magic power was still only 100. Card name, Mystic Beast, Type, Spirit Card, Rarity, Common Race, Beastkin, Attribute, Light, Magic Power, 100, Attack, 200, Defense, 100, Ultimate Skill, Light of Heart. If Dark's Mystic Beast, Evie, had a qualitative change in its core, then Vert's Mystic Beast, Stag, and Robert's Mystic Beast, Castle, were completely reflected in their surface stats. All three of their Mystic Beasts differed from the standard template. Vert's attempt to win the intra-class competition was not blind arrogance. But after practicing with Robert for a while, Vert gradually realized that his idea was too naive. Robert's castle was just too tough. With the stag's 200 attack points, he couldn't even cause any damage to it. After repeated fruitless attempts, Vert said helplessly, "This isn't fair, Robert." Robert, however, had completely shaken off his depression from last night and laughed triumphantly. "No, this is reality, Vert. 300 to 200, even I can calculate that." Vert frowned, "But I remember Professor Jones once said that the surface stats of magic spirit cards are only for reference, and there will actually be significant discrepancies." Robert said smugly, "The discrepancy is that I'm even tougher than you imagined." "Ha ha ha. This is unplayable." Vert lamented, "Let's call it a night, I want to practice on my own." Afterwards, the two parted ways. Robert wandered around outside, watching many first-year students practicing dueling, but they were all just messing around, their laughter restrained. Vert, however, after separating from Robert, took out the flower card adorned with red lilac. Inputting magic power, that person's face reappeared in the flower card. Vert's expression was somewhat dazed. The anomaly in the library made him realize that this flower card was unusual. But he didn't know how to deal with it. Should he tell a professor? Or explore it himself? If he told a professor, would his own secrets be exposed as well? Unable to decide after thinking, Vert took out into the abyss that he carried with him. The moon was still very round tonight, he wondered if it would have any effect. But as soon as he opened the book cover, before he even stepped out of the castle to bask in the moonlight, the line of text had already begun to twist, and pink mist rose from the pages. But it didn't gather into the shape of an arrow dot. Instead, it floated towards the lilac flower card in his hand. Vert was shocked and subconsciously separated the two. But the pink mist accelerated and instantly drilled into the flower card. Immediately, the flower card changed. The lilacs on the card bloomed one after another, releasing a rich fragrance. Upperclassman Pandora's image suddenly came to life. From the surface of the card emerged the upper half of the senior sister's figure. She raised her delicate, slender hands and gently swept the strands of hair that hung by her ears back, revealing her snow-white, tender neck. Vert stared wide-eyed, looking at upperclassman Pandora, who was exactly like the real person, and was completely stunned. A few minutes later, Vert put into the abyss back into his bag, leaving only the flower card entwined with pink mist in his hand. He placed the flower card in his palm, occasionally looking down at upperclassman Pandora who had manifested in the flower card, and whispered, "Is it this way?" Upperclassman Pandora chuckled softly and nodded slightly. Her laughter was gentle and soft, like a clear spring flowing through his heart. Vert followed her guidance, somewhat entranced, and walked forward. Before long, he arrived at the place he had walked through last night, hurried past the statue of the Archmage, and then turned onto another fork in the road. Upperclassman Pandora's guidance was clearer than the mist. He entered the secret passage and quickened his pace. This time, he didn't take any wrong turns. In just over 10 minutes, he arrived at a hall. This hall was hidden deep within the castle, the size of a lecture hall, with two stone pillars standing in the center, carved with patterns of goddesses dancing. At the very front, a tall altar was built. On the altar stood a statue of a goddess. As Vert stepped into it, the torches on both sides of the hall automatically lit up, illuminating every corner of the hall. Vert looked nervously at the statue. The statue was exquisitely carved from delicate white jade, and the dust of history had not left many traces on it. It held its hands clasped in front of its chest, its eyes closed, and its head slightly bowed, as if praying for something. The firelight shone on it, reflecting a white light like the pale moon. Vert suddenly realized that just by looking at it, he felt like his mind was being drawn away. It was so sacred and beautiful. Snap. Footsteps suddenly arrived. Chapter 41, Dark Damon's first duel exercise. Who is it? Vert's keen senses kicked in almost instinctively, and he swiftly moved around the altar, hiding behind the statue of the goddess. Soon after, the sound of footsteps grew denser. The person arriving was not alone. Vert suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of loss. Was this place not meant for me alone? It felt like finally getting a toy, only to find it had been licked by someone else and not just one person, but several. Hiss. He dared not make a move, so he could only listen to the sounds and imagine their movements. At least 5 or 6 people entered the hall. Their voices were hushed, and it was unclear what they were saying, but they seemed to place something in front of the statue and began chanting what sounded like a hymn. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Fortunately, Vert's willpower was strong. If it had been Robert, he would have surely screamed in fear by now. As the chanting reached a certain stage, The white light on the statue began to flow, growing brighter and brighter. Vert strained to look up and noticed that some of the statue's minor imperfections were being meticulously repaired. Could they just be a group of repairers here to fix the statue? The thought flashed through his mind, but Vert himself didn't believe it. When the chanting ended, the atmosphere eased slightly, and the repairers began speaking more openly. Vert could faintly hear what they were saying: burn them to death. For the goddess. We will succeed. This is a holy war. The moon hid, and dawn approached. The light of dawn illuminated the earth, as if the righteous path endured forever. Dark opened the door and stepped out of his bedroom. Something sliding down the door crack caught his attention. He looked down and couldn't help but curl his lips into a smile. But after last night's experience, he quickly straightened his lips, recited a few lines of the Chushi Biao, and then bent down to pick up the flower card on the floor. Love stretches thousands of miles. The pure white datura is a soft flower of affection. Those who see this flower are cleansed of evil. Dark infused a trace of magic into the flower card, and the little Evi that appeared on the surface gave him the best morning greeting. Today was still a refreshing day. With beast studies not yet in session, Friday only had one dueling class. That said, scheduling the dueling class on Friday morning was precisely to allow it to drag on as long as needed. Today's class was still attended by all 4 houses. The class was held in Dueling Hall number 2. Before 8 a.m. almost all first-year students had arrived at the hall, most of them eager and full of anticipation for their first duel. Although this so-called elite mode was merely a watered-down version of a real duel, no one cared about that. As long as they could step onto the field and shout "my turn," it was enough to make the first years happy for a long time. Of course, there were also those who weren't happy. After all, not everyone could complete the creation of a magic beast within a week. In yesterday's magic theory class, many had points deducted for failing to complete their creations. Without Vert's generous help, Robert would have been one of them. Since class hadn't started yet, Dark found a bench to sit on. Before long, Diana and Rose squeezed over. "Dark, who do you think will win today's match?" Diana asked cheerfully. Dark smiled. "It's just a classroom match." "Ha." Diana slapped her thigh, her body bouncing slightly. "Anyway, my polar bear is already itching for a fight." Rose quickly tugged at Diana's sleeve, whispering, "Tone it down. Didn't you say last night you wanted to act more like a girl?" "Diana." Ding dong. The class bell rang amidst everyone's anticipation. The students stopped chatting and very conscientiously lined up in the center of the hall. Professor Jones was about half a minute late, dragging a pile of equipment into the hall. "The weather's nice today. Let's start with a lap to warm up." Professor Jones, as spirited as ever, issued the task without mercy. The students, who had been full of anticipation just moments ago, instantly deflated. "I thought we wouldn't have to run today." Despite their grumbling, the students, cowed by the professor's authority, began running. Robert knew that a little extra effort wouldn't make a difference, so he didn't push himself. He controlled his pace to run alongside Vert and couldn't help but ask, "By the way, Vert, where did you go last night?" "At 9, I was thinking of challenging you to a match." Vert opened his mouth, then after a long pause, said, "Robert, I don't have your stamina. Can we talk after the run?" Robert, "All right." After 2 laps, except for a few students, all the first years from the 4 houses were drained. Robert had wanted to continue questioning, but Professor Jones called out, "Those who still have energy, come over and help." Reluctantly, Robert and a few other energetic students walked over to help Professor Jones set up the arena. By the time the setup was complete, about 10 minutes had passed. The students had also regained their energy and gathered in the center of the hall. After a while, Professor Jones pulled out a metal sphere with 3 holes, like a bowling ball, and walked over, holding it in one hand. She looked at the students from the 4 houses and casually asked, "Does anyone know what this is?" The young mages glanced at each other, and immediately more than half raised their hands. This time, even Vert and Robert raised their hands. Professor Jones randomly picked a student. The student excitedly said, "It's a magic sphere, Professor." Professor Jones nodded approvingly. "Correct, it's a magic sphere, the core of magical duels." She then inserted her thumb, index, and middle fingers into the 3 holes of the magic sphere and continued, "The magic sphere, also known as the dual sphere or life sphere, creates a 360 degrees barrier when infused with magic like this." "Swati, explain the levels of the life barrier." "Sure, Professor." Saraswati stepped forward, her wheat-colored skin still radiant today. The life barrier of a magic sphere is generally divided into 5 levels, each corresponding to a different barrier strength. A level 1 life barrier has a magic value of 1000 points, level 2 has 2000 points, level 3 has 4000 points, level 4 has 8000 points, and level 5 has 16,000 points. In a magical duel, victory is achieved only by completely breaking the opponent's life barrier, or if the opponent surrenders or runs out of magic cards. Swati, 5 points. Professor Jones infused magic into the magic sphere, and a spherical barrier composed of multiple hexahedrons expanded. She gave it a gentle push, and the all-metal magic sphere floated forward slowly. The magic sphere circled above the students' heads before returning to Professor Jones's hand. She said, "In formal duels, learning how to maneuver the magic sphere to evade attacks is essential. Of course, today's duel has fewer requirements, and we're using retired practice magic spheres. The life barrier's magic value is temporarily set at 500. Chapter 42, Dark Demon finds no joy in the duel. After explaining some minor rules to keep in mind during the duel, Professor Jones brought out a jar filled with number tags and had the students draw them one by one. The young mages stepped forward in turn, reaching into the jar to draw their tags. Surprisingly, out of the 4 entire classes, only 78 students had completed the creation of their magic beast within a week. On average, that was fewer than 20 students per class. The rest were mostly in the stage of having failed their creations and having to start saving credits to buy material packs. It felt as though the professors had deliberately set a trap, opening Traveler's Street before teaching the creation of magic beasts, to teach a lesson to the first years who lacked restraint and squandered their credits. In any case, whether others learned their lesson or not, Vert and Robert had certainly learned theirs the hard way. As for whether they would change after this lesson, that was another matter entirely. Dark walked up to the jar and casually drew a tag, 7. "Well, looks like I have a connection with 7? Diana sidled up to him again. "So, what number did you get?" Dark, "Number 7. "What about you?" Diana, 77, hee. Rose, 55. "Those who have drawn their tags, infuse them with magic, separate them, and hand the blue side to me." Professor Jones brought out another empty jar to collect the blue tags. Only then did Dark notice that the tag in his hand was double-sided, red and blue. Infusing it with a trace of magic caused the red and blue sides to lose their magnetism, allowing them to be easily separated. Following Professor Jones's instructions, Dark handed in the blue tag and quietly waited with the red one in hand. The central area of the hall had been divided into 4 equal sections by props, and Professor Jones placed 2 magic spheres in each small section. Students without magic beasts were tasked with infusing magic into the magic spheres to learn how to activate the life barrier. Professor Jones also selected 4 students to act as referees. The matches will follow a single elimination format. Winners advance, losers are out. In the world of magical duels, there is only the champion. Professor Jones casually drew 2 blue tags from the jar and placed them on one side, then drew 2 more and placed them on the other side. Repeating this 4 times, she formed 4 groups of tags. She flipped the tags and announced, "The first round, 78 advancing to 39. 4 matches will proceed simultaneously. Numbers 6 and 8, 3 and 28, 66 and 7, 49 and 5, please prepare to enter the arena." Opening celebration? Dark glanced at the red tag numbered 7 in his hand, not particularly concerned. Diana and Rose, however, seemed more nervous than he was. "Dark, good luck. I'll always be on your side." "Good luck. It's not like this was some variety show audition." Dark walked with a dark expression toward Arena 3. 8 students entered the arena simultaneously, some nervous, some calm. Dark glanced over and saw that his opponent in the same arena, the student with tag number 66, was a girl from the Magic Institute. She had twin tails, big eyes, and a somewhat pale complexion. He casually reassured her, "Don't be nervous, it's just a practice match." "Okay, yeah." The girl bit her lip and clenched her fingers tightly. The 2 took their positions at opposite ends of the arena. In official matches, there were podiums that allowed players to overlook the entire arena, but here, there were only simple positions marked by white lines. Dark stood in his position and looked over the arena. Arena diagram. The arena for this in-class match was a simplified replica of a real arena, with the 1 out of 6 area closest to the player's positions designated as the summoning zone. This meant that the summoning area for magic spirits was restricted, preventing players from summoning magic spirits directly in their opponent's face, known as a face summon. It is said that originally magic duels did not have this rule, so mages often employed tactical summoning, making the duels become crude and chaotic. Some mages even employed line-of-sight blocking tactics, summoning large magic spirits directly in their opponent's face to block their vision. As the rules were gradually refined, such antics became much rarer. But human creativity knows no bounds, and there are still countless small tricks played within the rules. The referee for Arena 3 was Lungeon from the Noble House. "Hi." Lungeon waved at Dark, looking unusually listless. Well, being a referee was like being publicly executed. After all, They were the ones who hadn't managed to create a magic beast within a week. Dark certainly remembered this classmate who had gone out shopping early on Saturday. It seemed he had spent all his credits in Traveler's Street, ultimately leaving him with insufficient credits to buy more material packs for experiments. And his fellow unfortunate, Huet, seemed to be right next door. Dark smiled subtly. In official duels, the deck had to be placed on the card table in the player's podium. The magic projection mechanism would enlarge the magic cards for the audience's convenience. There were also rules like on-site shuffling. Starting hand of 5 cards. 30 seconds per turn. And drawing 2 cards per turn. The duel process was divided into only 3 phases. 1 preparation phase, shuffling, communication, taunting, starting hand 2 battle phase, drawing cards, summoning, combat, beating, 3 end phase, communication, taunting, collecting cards, declaration. Of course, today's duel didn't have so many rules. The twin-tailed girl from the Magic Institute was already clutching her only magic beast in her hand, nervously waiting for the referee's whistle. Dark suddenly worried if she might damage the magic beast from gripping it too tightly. Both magic spheres had already activated their life barriers with a magic value of 500 and were now floating in front of their respective players. Using magic to remotely control the magic sphere was an advanced technique, not covered in the first-year curriculum. Therefore, the only way to move the magic sphere was through physical pushing. Lungeon, begin preparation. Dark took out magic beast, Evi, from his card pouch, holding it between his index and middle fingers, and entered the preparation phase. Lungeon, battle countdown, 30s. Lungeon, 3, 2, 1, begin. The moment the battle phase began. My turn. Magic summon. In an instant, Dark raised his magic card, and by the 8th second of the battle phase, he had successfully summoned his magic beast. Evi-chan landed lightly without the slightest hesitation and began running like the wind. By the 12th second of the battle phase, it had already crossed the 10-meter dueling field and pressed its paw pads against the magic sphere floating on the ground. Evi, tilting its head to look at the girl across the field, Evi-chan made an adorable expression. Then, with 4 consecutive pats, it reduced the magic sphere's life barrier to a sliver of health. The twin-tailed girl was utterly overwhelmed by the cuteness, her magic faltering as she frantically began a second summon. Evi-chan waited patiently for her to summon her magic beast, and then delivered the final blow to the magic sphere. Battle over. Winner, Dark Demon. Darkseid collected his cards, and turned away. Dull. Tedious. Chapter 43 Diana never fears challenges. Is that it? Diana watched Dark slowly walk back and couldn't help but blink, feeling like something was off. These 4 matches were happening simultaneously, and while others had just started fighting, he was already back? Diana had a thought she'd been keeping to herself. She actually wasn't optimistic about Dark. After all, little Evi didn't look like the type of magical spirit that could take a hit and fight back. How could it be as fierce as her great white bear? But so, duels could be played like this? Without even a collision between magical spirits, just relying on a faster summoning speed, he'd stepped on the other's lifeline before they could even summon their magical spirit. The final letting go was probably Dark's charity. After all, it was someone's first duel in their life, and if they couldn't even successfully summon a magical spirit, it would definitely become a lifelong shadow. Of course, Diana wasn't the only one paying attention to this match. Whether it was Emma or Vert, their attention shifted to this side when Dark left the arena. But no one could have predicted that this duel would end in this way. Emma carefully considered her own summoning speed, her face paling slightly. Dark was just too fast. A summoning spell casting time of only 8 seconds completely exceeded the level of a first-year student. She originally thought her 12 seconds was fast enough, but now it seemed completely inadequate. This was no longer something that could be reversed by the strength comparison between magical spirits. This was an overwhelming advantage above the level of magical ability. On the other side, Vert's expression was also not good. He was determined to win this intramural competition. But if it was a match that could be lost even before a magical spirit could be summoned, how was he supposed to fight? What is my summoning spell casting time again? Vert suddenly realized that he had never really calculated his casting time. Next group, number 1, number 13. Professor Jones directly drew the number plates for the 5th group. Robert exclaimed in surprise, "It's your turn, Vert." Vert nodded, took his number plate, and walked towards Arena 3, his steps slightly heavy. His opponent was an unfamiliar Fool's Court boy. The other boy looked quite simple and honest. But when both sides entered the arena, the Fool's Court boy suddenly lowered his voice and said, "Are you really the child of the hero?" Vert was taken aback, not quite understanding why he would ask such a question. At the start of the battle phase, both of them started casting summoning spells almost simultaneously. Vert summoned the stag at least 2 seconds faster, but when the stag landed, accelerated, and charged into the opponent's summoning area, the other person's summoning spell was finally completed. A black bull with a layer of rock skin on its forehead suddenly appeared in front of the magic ball, blocking Vert's stag. However, the stag continued to charge without hesitation, using the force bonus from its acceleration to forcefully overturn the black bull. Vert seized the advantage and didn't let go, eventually exhausting the thick-skinned bull. Immediately after, Diana, Rose, Emma, and Robert also took to the stage one after another. Diana won without any suspense. Her magical beast, polar bear, scattered her opponent's magical beast, unicorn rabbit, with a single paw strike. And Rose played the role of the little white rabbit in another match. On the contrary, Emma's otter barely managed to win. Emma originally wanted to rely on her 12-second summoning speed to try and replicate Dark's strategy. But her opponent was an honors student from the magic court. Although slightly slower than her, he still successfully completed his summoning in less than 14 seconds. The magical spirits of both sides collided in the left half of the arena. Emma's otter was a standard, magical beast, with magic attack and defense of 100. In a pure fight, it once fell into a disadvantage, but finally found an opportunity to spray a mouthful of salty soda on the opponent's magical spirit's face, thus reversing the defeat into victory. As for Robert, he was lucky, encountering a student from the Fool's Court. Both of them took more than 16 seconds to summon their magical spirits. Robert directly summoned Magical Beast, Castle, above the magic ball. The hollow interior of the castle chess piece perfectly covered the small magic ball, turning into an unshakable, solid fortress. This match dragged on until the end of the first round of matches. Amidst the students' bewildered expressions, Professor Jones announced the simultaneous advancement of both sides with considerable reluctance. Thus, from the first round of 78 students down to 39, a total of 40 students advanced. The second round of matches began immediately after. Dark was still the first to go. His opponent was a student from the noble court. That student was originally bragging to his friends. His magical beast was a small dragon-type dinosaur, which had shown overwhelming power advantage in the previous duel. Looking at the entire field, only Diana's polar bear could contend with him. Therefore, he did have the qualifications to boast. However, life is like this. Sometimes it's not that you are strong enough to overcome all obstacles, because there are always people stronger than you. Drolan entered the arena with a pale face. When approaching Dark, he suddenly had an idea and asked with a cheeky smile, "Dark, can you let me summon my magical beast before we fight?" Dark's expression was indifferent. "What do you think?" Drolan had no choice but to laugh dryly and walk towards the path of certain defeat. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Drolan, who had lost quickly, immediately ran into the washroom, hammering hard on the sink. Damn it, it's just a little faster. What's there to be arrogant about? He must have studied summoning spells before entering the academy. Otherwise, just relying on that little fox? Damn it. Don't let me catch up to you. After cursing and crying, he emerged as a proud and elegant noble again. Drolan walked out of the washroom with slightly red eyes, just in time to see his only rival in mind Diana dueling with Robert from the Knight's Court. The Drolan family and the Great Bear family were nominal competitors in the kingdom, but the relationship between the two families was not actually that bad. He and Diana had met once a long time ago during a family visit. But the carefree Diana simply didn't remember him. This had made him feel lost for a long time. And Robert, as the follower of the child of the hero, was just an annoying little character in his eyes. Only Robert's magical beast, Castle, was truly eye-catching, making people feel wary. Drolan, you're back? Yeah, went to the restroom. Drolan showed a flawless smile and asked his companions, how is it? Our kingdom bear shouldn't disappoint, right? A small, chubby boy with his arms crossed raised his chin and said smugly, see for yourself. Drolan then turned his head to look over. Roar. Diana's polar bear suddenly let out a roar, and actually inserted its fingers into the gap between the castle and the ground, lifting this heavy castle up with brute force. Chapter 44, Emma Metis takes her first steps into the pay-to-win path. Doran, ha 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 ha. Diana couldn't help but laugh heartily as she watched her giant polar bear slowly lift Robert's turtle shell. Robert, on the other hand, looked as if he had seen a ghost, his mouth wide open as if he could fit a goose egg inside. Don't just stand there, Robert. Vert, who was watching from the sidelines, couldn't help but shout. But Robert, aside from forcefully closing his mouth, truly didn't know what else he could do. The students from the Night Academy, who had mocked Robert the night before but were now being proven wrong in the first round, also burst into laughter, albeit without malice. After all, it was genuinely funny. Watching his castle about to be completely overturned by the giant polar bear, Robert finally couldn't hold back and roared, Fortify. For the first time, the castle responded to his call, a layer of earthy yellow light flowing across its walls. It was clear that the castle, now using the Fortify skill, had become much harder, and the earthy yellow barrier helped absorb the impact better. However, Fortify was still just Fortify, not rooted. What was meant to be overturned would still be overturned. Roar. The polar bear unleashed the power of a bear, flipping Robert's castle over in one go. With that, the magic orb was left completely unprotected. As Diana commanded the polar bear to completely shatter the life barrier of the magic orb, this one-sided duel was officially declared over. Robert stepped off the field with a grim expression, handing over to Vert. Bro, it's up to you now. Vert, don't worry, I'll succeed. Robert, this is our last chance. Vert, no maybes. Diana, on the other hand, shook her card to recall the polar bear and happily skipped off the field. When she saw Rose and Dark, she ran over, patted her chest, and proudly asked, "So? How big was my bear?" Dark, for once, gave a thumbs up, big. Numbers 13 and 16. Professor Jones announced the next pair of numbers. Vert and Robert both jolted, almost simultaneously turning their heads to look in the same direction. Emma Metis was watching the match alone. She suddenly noticed someone looking at her and turned her gaze, only to lock eyes with the two of them. Zzz, a brief encounter. Emma turned her head back, slightly annoyed. Vert and Robert exchanged a glance and stood up at the same time. Robert couldn't help but say, "Don't lose." Vert's expression was slightly serious. "I won't, as long as I'm not slower than her." After the previous round, Vert had already figured out his summoning speed. Although he hadn't practiced for long, his normal summoning spell casting time had already been reduced to 12 seconds, almost the same as Emma's. He even believed that if he focused a bit more, he could shave off another second. If it were 11 seconds, he would have a chance even against Dark. The temporary arena was only 10 meters wide. While 10 meters might seem short, just a few steps away, the time it took for a magic spirit to be summoned and land was still a factor. Not to mention the time needed for acceleration. As long as he could successfully summon before the magic orb's life barrier was completely destroyed, that seemingly weak little fox shouldn't be a match for the stag. Coincidentally, Vert and Doran had the same thought. Of course, now wasn't the time to think about these things. Vert was very clear that his current opponent was Emma. There won't be any problems. Emma's otter is weak. The only thing to watch out for is its water spray. Vert and Emma crossed paths, but neither spoke. The first-year magic students were still too innocent to grasp the art of trash talk. The field was divided into red and blue sides. Vert stood on the red side, while Emma stood on the blue side. The referee was Sievert from the Noble Academy. Sievert, watching the two key students from the Night Academy face off in the second round, seemed somewhat gleeful. But he still had to blow the whistle. Beep ready. Vert and Emma immediately drew their magic cards. Outside the field, Dark, Diana, and Rose walked over. He was also very interested in this match. Diana whispered, "Dark, who do you think will win?" Dark narrowed his eyes slightly. On the surface, Vert has the upper hand, but in reality. Diana, in reality? Dark, they're both not simple. Diana, huh? Begin the duel. At 11.5 seconds. Vert broke through his limit, completing the summoning spell before Emma. The majestic stag emerged from the white light, its massive antlers like branches fiercely pointing forward. Start. And less than half a second later, Emma also completed her summoning spell before the 12-second mark. The otter, about the size of a little EV, performed a slide as it was about to land, avoiding the stag's charge and nimbly choosing to run in a circle. Emma's strategy was very clear. In a direct contest of strength, her otter was no match for Vert's stag. But the ultimate goal of the duel wasn't to defeat the opponent's magic spirit, but to break the magic orb's life barrier. Although she had failed to imitate Dark in the previous match, Emma had still learned from it and expanded her thinking. At this point, most of the first-year students were still obsessed with the magic spirit duels, not yet understanding the essence of magic duels. Seeing Emma's otter dart like the wind toward his magic orb, Vert felt a slight tension and quickly called his stag back to defend. This move cost him his first chance at victory. The stag's attack was clearly stronger than the otter's, and with its earlier start and shorter straight line distance, a direct exchange would have been a sure win. But he didn't have that awareness yet. The stag, returning to defend, couldn't catch up to the agile otter, allowing the otter to take a big bite out of the magic orb's life barrier, draining a significant chunk of its magic value. But the otter didn't dare to continue, immediately fleeing from the magic orb. The stag, now guarding the magic orb, stomped its hooves, slightly agitated. Vert was also a bit nervous. He had expected Emma to be tricky, but not this tricky. This won't do. I need to come up with a plan. Vert's mind raced, and he quickly came up with an idea. Under his command, the stag lowered its head and lifted the magic orb, wedging it between its antlers. Perfect? Vert felt reassured. Emma's otter didn't dare to face the stag head-on, which made Vert feel even more confident of victory. He immediately commanded the stag to charge toward Emma's magic orb. This was a case of learning on the spot. But as the stag began to run, Emma suddenly directed her otter to approach. The otter seized the opportunity, opened its mouth, and shot a water gun, hitting the magic orb wedged between the stag's antlers. The magic orb instantly flew into the air. At the same time, its magic value dropped significantly. Ultimate skill? Vert wasn't alarmed, instead, he was pleased. The ultimate skill of a 1-star magic spirit card usually consumed 50 magic points. For a magic spirit with only 100 magic points, it could only be used once. This meant that the otter was now completely harmless. He immediately commanded the stag to retrieve the magic orb. But just as the stag caught the magic orb, the otter, which should have had no magic left to use its ultimate skill, shot another water gun. This water gun was clearly well trained, firing with extreme precision. The red magic orb was sent flying once again. Its 500 magic points had now dropped to 200. Vert stared intently at Emma's otter. The otter, which should have dissipated after using up its 100 magic points, was still standing there, full of energy. What's going on? As his gaze shifted, Vert finally noticed that Emma was holding another card in her hand. Chapter 45, Vert Gold doesn't bother pulling down the flags. The second magic card. In the eyes of the young mages, this was simply cheating. Why did Emma have 2 magic cards when everyone else only had 1? Professor, she's cheating. Robert was roaring incessantly in his heart. How could Emma do this? Doesn't she know this is our last hope? No. She's so smart, she must have known. That's why she specifically got a second magic card, just to stop us from repaying our debt. While Robert was inexplicably filled with grief and indignation, Vert in the field was also somewhat affected. But he remained relatively calm. The defense of the magic sphere was defaulted to 0, so once hit, the mana value of the life barrier would directly decrease. Emma had already hit the magic sphere 3 times, but the life barrier still had 200 mana points left. It should be able to withstand one more attack. Let's decide the outcome before the second attack comes. Vert muttered to himself, suddenly raising high the mystical beast, stag, and shouting, "Shine, light of the soul." Instantly, the stag on the field raised its head, releasing an exceptionally intense light from between its antlers. Ultimate skill, Light of the Soul. Mana cost, 50. Cooldown, 60s. The ultimate skill of a 1-star mystical spirit usually has a cooldown of 30s. A cooldown longer than 30s usually implies high power. The light of the soul illuminated half of the field, leaving the otter with nowhere to hide. Vert couldn't help but show a smug smile. Meanwhile, Emma suddenly raised the card in her hand. Ding dong. A sound like coins clinking gently resonated. The otter's eyes simultaneously displayed the symbol. It was the symbol representing the kingdom's holy coin. Coins X3, the magic card in Emma's hand was as simple and unadorned as this. Each coin could recharge the mystical spirit once. Each recharge provided 50 mana points, reducing the cooldown of an ultimate skill by 1. It could be recharged 3 times in total. This meant her otter could unleash 2 more ultimate skills, just enough to finish off the magic sphere with only 200 mana points left. Provided it could survive. Seeing that the otter couldn't withstand the illumination of the light of the soul, Emma had no choice but to use 2 recharges in a row, barely keeping the otter alive with 50 mana points. At the same time, Vert's stag also only had 50 mana points left. From 3 to 5 minutes after being summoned, mystical spirits would start consuming their own mana. With just 1 point consumed, both mystical spirits would be unable to use their skills again. Vert's gaze was sharp, his fighting spirit high. Charge at it, stag. Emma, however, screamed, dodge. Circle the field. The small field, only 10 meters long, wasn't enough for the stag to gain speed, giving the more agile otter an advantage in dodging and weaving. Emma nervously watched Vert's hand, reaching for her card pack again. Meanwhile, Vert also noticed Emma's movement and couldn't help but curse inwardly. Another one? Damn it, can't hide it anymore. I wanted to save it for dark. Gritting his teeth, Vert pulled out his second magic card from his card pack. Yes, he also had a second magic card. Outside the field, Robert, seeing that Vert also had a second card, immediately exclaimed excitedly, "What did I say?" Vert never disappoints. Famous for double standards. Diana couldn't help but ask, "Dark, why do they have so many cards?" Dark, however, was staring at Vert's second magic card, his brow slightly furrowed. He sensed a familiar aura. As the battle intensified, the students outside grew more excited. Especially the contestants from the Night Academy, all proudly cheering. although most didn't have a good impression of the two on the field. One was the son of a hero who had willingly become a slacker. The other was a top student who thought herself clever and isolated from the group. But this didn't stop them from being students of the Night Academy. Meanwhile, on the field, Vert and Emma simultaneously raised their magic cards high. Forbidden Love. Golden Treasure Chest. The magic card in Vert's hand released a pink mist, vaguely forming the outline of a woman. The magic card in Emma's hand, however, burst into dazzling golden light, blindingly bright. On the field, pink and golden lights vied for brilliance, the stag and the otter glaring at each other. The otter's eyes had turned into shapes. The stag's eyes had turned into shapes. Neither of them had expected that the other's magic card would be of the same nature as theirs. The otter, attracted by the forbidden love, came under Vert's control for a single turn. The stag, attracted by the golden treasure chest, came under Emma's control for a single turn. In an instant, the two mystical spirits had exchanged control. It's over. The moment he saw the situation on the field, Vert's heart sank to the bottom. Emma, however, was ecstatic, more excited than ever. Stag, attack the red magic sphere. The magic sphere, knocked away by the otter, was still floating in the air. The stag charged forward, and before the otter could move, it delivered a massive antler strike, shattering the life barrier on the magic sphere. Bang! The barrier dissipated into starlight. I won, I won. Emma jumped up in excitement. At this moment, she finally showed the emotions appropriate for a child of her age. Her slightly chubby cheeks were flushed. Overwhelmed with excitement. Vert was at a loss, lost just like that? It's impossible. How could I lose to Emma? What about Dark? The magic card that fell from his hand scattered lilac flowers. The pink mist retracted into the card, gradually reverting to a blurry human form. This card, originally a love divination card, flower card, now the forbidden love magic card, had failed to turn his defeat into victory. This was the victory of effort. The defeat of laziness. How could this happen? Robert outside the field let out a cry of despair. Before Vert went on the field, he said as long as he wasn't slower than her, he could win. It's over, completely over. Once it's past 1 o'clock, it's a debt of 1,280 credits. Impossible to repay. Robert's mind was filled with visions of Emma holding the IOU, stepping on their backs, scolding them like a witch with a sharp voice to mop and scrub the floors as slaves. Grave accent _ comma so tragic. Dark, however, was deep in thought. Coin recharge, golden treasure chest. Is this a value of currency? Then what about forbidden love? That should be a flower card, right? How did Vert turn a flower card into a magic card? By following him, can I find the source of the flower cards? The defeat of the hero's son did not affect the continuation of the competition. When Vert came out of the field, he was not greeted by Robert, who was lost in despair, but by several boys from the Night Academy. Well done, Vert, you really did it. One of them, a boy with a sunny demeanor, patted his shoulder encouragingly. Another boy nudged his arm, comforting him. Don't be discouraged, your opponent was Emma after all. Vert stiffened, feeling even worse. Chapter 46, Dark Daemon killed the match. The lost Vert and the despairing Robert turned into petrified sculptures in the wind. However, the atmosphere of the match was heated up by the liveliness of Vert and Emma. Round 3, top 20 to top 10. The original 4-group advancement was changed to 2-group simultaneous matches. When Dark stepped onto the field again, a group of young girls quickly gathered outside the arena. These young girls were mainly from the Noble Academy, but there were also students from the other 3 academies mixed in. Especially the young girls from the Magic Academy, who had very little resistance to someone who was academically excellent, self-disciplined, handsome, and seemed to have walked out of the pages of a book. Of course, they were still in that innocent age where even a touch of fingertips would make them shy for a long time, so they were simply attracted. In the arena, Dark looked at the student from the Night Academy opposite him and once again gave no chance to his opponent. Although this lacked spectacle, such a clean and decisive victory still had its own unique flavor. Round 4, top 10 to top 5. Still no exceptions. Round 3, top 5 to top 3. The 5 contestants were Dark and Diana from the Noble Academy, Emma from the Night Academy, Saraswati from the Magic Academy, and another male student. Among them, Dark was lucky to get a bye, while the 2 students from the Magic Academy faced Diana and Emma respectively. As a result, neither of the Magic Academy students could overcome the high walls. Saraswati from the Magic Academy showed strong strength but still lost to Emma, regrettably defeated. The other male student was crushed by Diana's violence. Round 4, top 3 to top 2. This time, Diana was favored by the goddess of luck. Therefore, the semi-final would be between Dark and Emma. Although this was only a semi-final for the top 3 to top 2, in the eyes of the students from the Night Academy and the Noble Academy, It was the final. The final to decide whether the champion would be from the Knight Academy or the Noble Academy. This clash of titans attracted everyone's attention. Even the nearly petrified Vert and Robert came back to life. No matter how many complaints they had about Emma, they still stood on the side of the Knight Academy. Under the gaze of all the students from the 4 academies, Professor Jones personally stepped down to act as the referee. Dark and Emma entered the arena respectively and stood in their positions. Duelists could draw cards during the preparation phase, and both Dark and Emma held their only magic beast in their hands. Dark's face showed little expression. Emma, on the other hand, was visibly nervous. Dark Demon. Emma suddenly mustered her courage and spoke. Although puzzled, Dark still gave her his attention. But Emma gritted her teeth and finally only blurted out one sentence, "I won't lose to you." Dark was taken aback and really wanted to say, "Have we ever interacted?" But in the end, he didn't say something so embarrassing. "Dark, I've seen your efforts." "Emma? Save the talk for after the match, keep your focus, concentrate on the game." Professor Jones suddenly interrupted their conversation and started the countdown for the battle. This in-class match had brought her many surprises from these two, and she was eager to find out who would be the final winner. Would it be Dark, who advanced without suspense with his solid summoning skills? Or Emma, who had made it this far with 2 extra magic cards? Perhaps seeing students grow beyond expectations is the joy of being a teacher. With a light wave of her hand, a firework countdown appeared in the center of the arena for the final 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Start. A fully focused speed race. Dark undoubtedly summoned Magic Beast first. But unlike any previous time, Evie did not immediately rush to the opposite side but trotted to the center of the arena. As Emma summoned Magic Beast Otter, at 11.5 seconds, Evie stood up on its hind legs and extended a paw towards the otter. The otter, with an intelligence level of 2.0, reacted after a while and let out a series of ying sounds at Evie. Evie extended its paw again and beckoned. Only then did the otter cautiously approach the center of the arena. The 2 magic creatures, both with 100 magic attack and defense, and similar in size, began a close confrontation in the center of the arena. Ying. The otter opened its mouth, issuing a deterrent. Evie tilted its head and used cuteness. The otter immediately grinned and started laughing with ying sounds. Thus, Evie calmly walked past it, trotting with light steps towards Emma's magic ball. Emma was momentarily stunned, only then noticing that Dark had used a new magic card. What kind of magic card is this? Looking at the otter, which was only capable of silly laughter and had completely lost its combat ability, Emma's little brain almost crashed. She certainly couldn't just wait for defeat. She immediately drew her strongest card, Golden Treasure Chest. With gold coins x3, now ineffective, only this Golden Treasure Chest could bring her a sliver of comfort. However, her summoning cooldown was 15 seconds, unlike Dark, who had compressed his cooldown to within 8 seconds, so she still needed a bit of waiting to use a new magic card. By the time her summoning cooldown was ready, Evie had already pressed its paw against the magic ball just like every time before. Pat. 1 paw. The magic ball's magic value -100. Pat. Another paw. The magic ball's magic value -100. Otter, pull yourself together. Emma finally couldn't help but shout. The otter seemed to hear her call, suddenly breaking free from the hallucinatory effects of Happy Card, and as it turned its head, it shot out a water gun. But Evie grabbed the magic ball and blocked it. Bang! The magic ball's magic value -100. But the magic ball was also knocked away by the impact of the water gun. Good opportunity. Emma immediately seized the gap and used her summoning skill to activate Golden Treasure Chest. After 11.5 seconds, a treasure chest filled with gold appeared on the arena. But Evie on the field had unknowingly puffed out its chest, its eyes full of arrogance. When the golden treasure chest appeared before it, it merely gave a disdainful smile, then stepped past it with elegant steps, and slapped the magic ball with its paw. Pat. The magic ball's magic value -100. By the time the otter charged back, it had already raised its paw again. Pat. Still no direct confrontation. No combat between magic creatures. Only the crisp, ear-piercing pat-pat sounds. Dark didn't even use arrogance too, and he ended the match. He returned Evie to its card, placed it along with Happy Card, and Arrogance I, into his card pack, and then turned to leave the arena. As if this semi-final match was no different from the first warm-up match. In fact, it was just that. The level of the first-year students was too low. When Emma used 2 magic cards, he had already used 3. This made the duel seem utterly meaningless. Because the entire process was so bizarre, the audience outside the arena didn't even react. Only after he left the arena did sporadic applause begin. Then the applause grew louder, shaking the venue. The subsequent final was even more meaningless. Diana's summoning speed was considered fast, but she still couldn't break into the 13-second mark, and her proud polar bear couldn't even be summoned before the match was killed. In the end, even Professor Jones couldn't help but cover her forehead. Such a match was a first in her teaching history. The gap was just too vast. Chapter 47, Dark Demons Study Secrets at the end of the duel class. After distributing the champion's reward of 1,000 credits, Professor Jones invited Dark onto the stage. Dark, who hadn't fully grown yet, stood next to Professor Jones, his head only reaching the lower edge of her spherical body. Professor Jones, with 1/16th giant blood, was simply too large. Dark tried his best to maintain a slight smile on his lips, calmly facing the chattering first-year students below. Professor Jones said, "Demon, you don't mind sharing some study secrets with your classmates, do you?" Dark readily agreed, "Of course not." Professor Jones nodded in satisfaction, "Then I'll leave the next part to you." Dark nodded, took a step to the center, and began speaking. "In fact, there are no shortcuts in learning. The reason I've come this far is, besides self-discipline, moderation. Those who can restrain themselves are the most authoritative. But excessive restraint can sometimes backfire, so moderation is also very important. Whether it's the moderation of desires or the moderation of study, both are necessary. Personally, I prefer a balance between work and leisure, using some fun content to alleviate the monotony of study, giving the brain some rest time. Moreover, everyone is the architect of their own destiny." Dark spoke for about 15 minutes. Some understood the principles behind his words, while others just wanted to finish quickly and go eat. This is just like on the road of life, where a fork in the road has a signpost, the left path rugged but leading to the peak, the right path smooth but leading to the valley, yet most people still choose to go right. The so-called principles remain just principles because they are known but not acted upon. Dark could only say that he truly shared his feelings from the past month. Amidst applause of uncertain sincerity, he stepped down, and then welcomed Friday afternoon, when the Traveler's Street reopened. Dark pulled out his academy card to check. Credits, 1,570. Compared to the first opening of the Traveler's Street, the first-year students were much more reserved this week. In any case, it was definitely not because of the unfounded reason of not enough credits. Fortunately, some ordinary consumer goods weren't that expensive. With just 1 credit you could order a cup of coffee and sit comfortably all day at the Forest Cafe on Traveler's Street. Before heading to Traveler's Street, Dark once again took out his notebook for item excerpts. Compared to last week's item excerpts, this week added a few more items to the list. These items were containers that could be used for long-term storage of mental substances. Magic Brain Bottle, one of the alchemy tools in the Magic Brain series, storing emotions, desires, knowledge, and other substances in a simulated magic brain. The advantage is its vitality, allowing for long storage times. The disadvantage is also its vitality, which may lead to contamination and deterioration of the stored substances. Insect Tree, a potted plant with branches like insects, capable of injecting emotions, desires, knowledge, and other substances into the insect branches. Since the essence of the insect branches is plant, there's no need to worry about contamination of the stored substances. The downside is that if the tree dies, the insects die too, making it hard to cultivate. Advanced Mind Bottle, the advanced version of the Mind Bottle, with no downsides except being very expensive, with a shelf life of up to a month, but in fact, all these things were expensive. It's just that the Advanced Mind Bottle was even more expensive. Dark's first goal today was to pick one of these to purchase. From 12 o'clock to 12:30 was the peak period for crowding into Traveler's Street. Dark deliberately waited until 12:30 before walking out of the Noble Academy's tower path. On his way to the castle gate, he unexpectedly encountered Vert, Robert, and Emma again. Wasn't it them on Monday too? Recalling Monday's encounter, Dark kept a part of his mind alert. Emma Matheson had unusually styled her fluffy brown hair, securing it with cute cat hairpins, and had applied some powder to make her skin appear fairer. She had never dressed up to this extent before, completely changing the impression she gave. Could it be that the defeat in the duel match hit her too hard? Dark couldn't help but wonder. On the other hand, Vert and Robert were as usual. After losing their last chance, they pondered hard and finally decided to apologize for their previous quarrel, begging Emma for forgiveness. "I've already apologized, Emma." Robert once again blocked Emma's way. Emma puffed her cheeks, somewhat angry. "So I've heard, can you move aside?" Vert quickly grabbed Robert's arm, completely unaware how a well-intentioned apology had escalated to this point. Robert's thinking probably still lingered at a child's level, believing that any issue could be resolved with an apology. But Vert, having experienced more, knew that most of the time, Apologies couldn't solve problems. They were actually here to beg Emma to give up on collecting the debt. That was a full 640 credits, and in half an hour, it would double to 1,280. If it were them, they definitely wouldn't easily give up on this debt. Remembering his previous bold statements about repaying the debt, Vert couldn't help but blush, reluctantly saying, Emma, we've realized our mistake. We shouldn't have forced you to lend us money to buy magic chess, and we shouldn't have insulted you afterward. Emma, you've already said that. I've accepted the apology, so can you please immediately quickly right now move aside? No. Vert mustered the courage of a hero's son, shamelessly saying, so, can we settle the debt? Like revising the contract to fix the owed credits at 640? Robert interjected, 640 is already a lot. Gasp. Vert was almost dumbfounded, wishing he could immediately seal Robert's foul mouth. Emma coldly glanced at Robert, this time finally speaking plainly, you don't owe me 640 credits. 5 credits, Vert. Repay me 5 credits, and we're even. Vert's ears twitched, thinking he misheard. What do you mean? How could it be 5 credits? Emma said, read the school rules more, Vert. Credits are used as a special currency within St. Mary's. The academy couldn't not regulate borrowing issues. Credit loans exceeding 10 times the principal are invalid within the academy. From 1 o'clock Monday afternoon, the contract was void. You only need to repay me the principal. Vert felt like he was about to fall apart. But you said before. Emma angrily said, because Robert insulted me. I wasn't happy to tell you. So what? Vert, Robert. Emma suddenly pulled out her academy card, 5 credits, Vert, hurry up. This afternoon at the Forest Cafe, there's a St. Mary's ladies' tea party, if I'm late because of you. Vert quickly swiped his card, clearing the debt. The burden that had been on his shoulders for a whole week suddenly disappeared. Vert felt like he was floating, as if his feet could leave the ground and he could fly. But after Emma took back her academy card, she showed no mercy. Also, Vert. I think it's necessary to remind you, don't hang out with Robert anymore. Think of your departed parents. Chapter 48, Dark Demon Online caught eating melons. Emma left her final ripple and walked away without looking back. But the atmosphere between Vert and Robert instantly froze. Only Dark, transformed into a heartless melon-eating machine, devoured the entire melon. Combining what he saw on Monday with the many unusual behaviors of the two during this period, Dark more or less guessed the course of events. But what he couldn't understand was, how did the trio end up in such a fragmented state? Just because he, the villain, didn't apply pressure? That couldn't be it, right? But admittedly, Dark became somewhat interested in the subsequent developments. Emma completely broke off with Vert and Robert, and the relationship between Vert and Robert also showed cracks due to Emma's final ripple. Next, would Vert turn to Emma to mend their relationship, or would he remain as steadfast as gold with Robert? TSK, it's got that drama vibe. Thinking that it wouldn't be too late to go to Traveler Street later, Dark continued to eat melons. In any case, Vert did take Emma's last words to heart, especially since Robert's behavior of constantly dragging him down this week made him realize that Emma's reminder wasn't without reason. Yes, Vert gradually became aware of the root of the problem. This was also the main reason why the atmosphere was gradually stiffening. Before the air completely solidified, Robert finally couldn't help but say, no way? Vert. You're not really going to believe Emma's words and want to. Vert gave a dry laugh and patted Robert on the shoulder. What are you talking about, Robert? We've been good friends since the start of school. So? Since this damn debt doesn't exist at all, shall we go for a stroll on Traveler Street or go back for a game? Huh, don't scare me like that. Robert breathed a sigh of relief. Of course, back to the library? Vert was stunned. No way? The library? Robert also gave a dry laugh. We haven't finished the assignments for arithmetic and magical history, have we? Emma probably never imagined that her last words to Vert would have a greater impact on Robert than on Vert himself. In the almost stagnant atmosphere, Robert finally realized that if he didn't make a change, he might completely lose this son of the hero friend. Watching the two actually head towards the library, Dark's gaze gradually became strange, and he couldn't help but step out from the corner. Did they choose the bro route? I wonder how long it will last. Once a crack appears in human relationships, it's not something that can be easily repaired. Dark suddenly felt that the melon had lost its flavor again. He shook his head and walked in the direction Emma had disappeared. Speaking of which, Emma actually thought about attending a ladies' tea party? What's the reason for her change? Emma Metis, of course, was inspired by Dark's championship speech, thinking to try the so-called balance between work and leisure. That is, to use some fun content to alleviate the monotony of study, leaving some rest time for the brain to work more efficiently. The ladies' tea party on Traveler Street was something she learned about last week when she passed by the Forest Cafe and was handed a flyer by a maid. At the time, she threw the flyer away, but her memory was strong enough. The Forest Cafe is themed around a real forest, where customers enter the range of a forest field card as soon as they step through the door. In the tranquil environment of giant tree roots, enjoying the aftertaste of aromatic coffee is a unique experience. This ladies' tea party was organized by senior students under the guise of a book club, focusing on literary exchanges among the young ladies. Emma thought such entertainment might suit her well. Thus, to become better, she stepped out of the cage that confined her, named thirst for knowledge. Human personality is not innate. Even characters with initial personalities in a work can change as the story develops. Whether they fall or grow depends on the character themselves. Dark deeply understood this. He followed Emma into the lakeside pavilion, chose one of the 2 free stone tables, and sat on one of the stone stools, giving a slight twist of his hips, luckily transferring. Exiting the lakeside pavilion again and crossing the garden-style bridge known as the Changing Bridge, he entered Traveler Street. A week later, Traveler Street had become slightly unfamiliar again. Dark was in no hurry to go to that Morgan store, but instead browsed around a shop selling potted plants. Keeping animals was prohibited in the castle of Street Marian Academy, but no one forbade keeping some flowers and plants. Even Professor Thompson of Potionology occasionally mentioned some interesting potted plants in class, recommending students to try cultivating them. Among them, for example, the catgrass in front of Dark. Just entering this shop, Dark's attention was immediately captured by the catgrass displayed in the most prominent place, almost forgetting his original purpose for coming the insect tree. The so-called catgrass is a plant that is completely a cat except for its tail being a stem. Every spring and autumn, beautiful flowers bloom on the heads of the catgrass. The Academy prohibits keeping cats but allows catgrass, which is undoubtedly a puzzling mystery. Although the roots of catgrass must be planted in soil, they can drag their pots around if they want. And they won't wither immediately even if they leave the soil for a short time. More importantly, they also meow and exhibit most cat behaviors except for excretion and eating. That is to say, keeping catgrass doesn't even require litter scooping or cat food. Instead, it requires a potion called cat juice. Just water the catgrass with cat juice every day and take it out for some sun, and that's enough to keep it alive. As far as Dark knows, after last week's opening of Traveler Street, many girls' dormitories had an extra pot of catgrass. For example, Rose bought a pot of orange Garfield. Cats are really good companions for healing the mind and body. Dark scratched the chin of a short-eared cat and couldn't help but voice his thoughts. Do you think so too? A familiar scent suddenly came from behind, and Dark shivered, as if a small cat had encountered a lion, his toes tightening. The orchid-like fragrance gently brushed the back of his neck, and even without turning around, Dark could feel the heavy pressure. Maintaining his cat-teasing posture, Dark asked, Senior, why are you here too? Senior Pandora chuckled lightly, I followed you here. Dark, came to buy cat juice. Pandora, so hard to fool. Chapter 49, Dark Demon embarks on a path of no return. Dark and Senior Pandora actually had very little interaction, mostly, it was just a few words exchanged during the registration process when entering or leaving the library. But to avoid lust +1, Dark always ran off after registering. However, he visited the library so often that, over time, they became familiar. Though this wasn't what he wanted to see. Slowly moving away from under Senior Pandora's pressure, he stood up as if composed, smoothing out the wrinkles on his clothes. Dark turned back and said, Hello, Senior. Pandora blinked, the heart-shaped dragon scale under her eye reflecting a gorgeous color. She crossed her arms and raised her head, Are you here to buy catgrass? Dark originally didn't want to buy any, but then he thought, having a pot of catgrass in the dorm might not be a bad idea. Raising cats is indeed a good way to soothe the soul. It helps to relax emotions and reduce stress. Especially cats that don't require litter scooping. If used properly, it might be more effective in reducing rage than those legendary magical items. Let's buy a pot. But before that, he needed to buy a pot of insect tree. Dark wouldn't get the order wrong. If buying catgrass led to not having enough credits to buy the insect tree, wouldn't that be putting the cart before the horse? So he thought about it and said, I have that intention, but not now. Pandora then enthusiastically said, Is there any trouble? If it's a lack of credits, I can offer an interest-free loan, repayable within a month, how about that? What's with this practiced approach? Dark's face darkened, and he quickly said, I have other important matters, so I won't disturb you, Senior. As he spoke, he had already stealthily moved half a footstep away. But Senior Pandora, having finally caught this coincidental opportunity, wouldn't let him off so easily. Just as Dark was about to move the other half of his footstep, Pandora had naturally blocked his path, squinting and smiling. Do you have an appointment with someone? Could it be that little girl who often sits behind you? She was referring to Emma. Dark didn't take the opportunity to escape but instead said seriously, "Senior, I'm still young." Pandola was momentarily stunned, then curiously asked, "Don't boys your age dislike being called young?" Dark then sternly said, "It's an objective fact." Pandola chuckled lightly, "Then I can only look forward to when you grow up." Looking at her moist pink lips opening and closing, Dark felt his primal force was almost uncontrollable. He hurriedly said, "We'll talk about it then." And then he forcibly crossed the line and hurried away. "We'll talk about it then?" Really not cute. After leaving the cat grass florist, Dark turned and entered a nearby cuckoo bird florist. Dark gave up thinking about what kind of bird a cuckoo bird was and directly stepped inside. The main product of the cuckoo bird florist was a type of tree stump bonsai called chirping tree, which could emit chirping sounds when sunlight slanted onto it, making it a very suitable natural alarm clock for dorm rooms. Dark passed by the myriad of strange chirping trees and suddenly perked up, spotting a potted insect tree in the corner. The insect tree was the relatively cheaper option among the three choices and Dark's first choice. Compared to Magic Brain Bottle and Advanced Thought Bottle, the insect tree had obvious drawbacks. One was that its shelf life was greatly affected by the growth condition of the insect tree itself. If not well maintained, it could easily lead to holes in the branches, causing the substances stored inside the insect branches to leak out, and sometimes even be absorbed by the insect branches themselves. Another was its limited storage capacity. Each mature insect branch could only store the amount of 1 to 3 magic brain pipettes, depending on the thickness and length of the branch. But it also had very clear advantages. First, each insect branch was separated, allowing different emotions to be stored in different branches. Second, it wasn't that expensive. After inquiring about the quality, age, and other details of the insect tree, Dark finally asked the key question, "How much is it in credits?" The owner of the cuckoo bird florist was a plump auntie, who looked Dark up and down and kindly said, "This isn't something a first-year student can afford. Just the selling price is 800 credits, and to keep it alive and well, you need to continuously buy the corresponding potions, which vary each season. It's very troublesome." Dark thought about it and asked, "How much are the potions in credits?" The plump auntie was stunned, then laughed. "Autumn potions are 30 credits per bottle, lasting a month. Winter potions are 50 credits per bottle, also lasting a month." Dark carefully considered and found it acceptable. It felt like the insect tree was a form of installment payment, with an initial payment of 800 and monthly repayments. Whereas, Magic Brain Bottle and Advanced Thought Bottle were one-time payments. The key was, judging from the price of the insect tree, Magic Brain Bottle and Advanced Thought Bottle were likely beyond his means. Dark didn't dwell on it further. He noted down the key points for cultivating the insect tree as mentioned by the plump auntie and then bought the potted insect tree and a bottle of autumn potion. This insect tree was about 80 centimeters tall, with 8 outward branching insect branches, resembling caterpillars, and the material was quite like rubber sticks. After packing it in a black bag, Dark peeked out to check the cat grass florist. Confirming that Senior Pandola had left, and then slipped in. He had really decided to buy cat grass. Remaining credits 740, more than I expected. Dark estimated he could still buy quite a few things, so he took a little tour around the cat grass florist. There were really a lot of cat grasses in the shop, with all kinds of varieties available. And the cat grasses all looked very well behaved. Each one was irresistibly cute. But as he wandered, Dark suddenly noticed something was off. Because in front of him appeared a snake. It was a cobra with its tail buried in a flower pot. When Dark saw it, it also very keenly opened its eyes and swayed its slender snake body towards Dark's gaze. He was instantly shocked. "Don't be afraid." The clerk at the cat grass florist was a young lady in her early 20s, with her hair tied up with a headband at the back of her head, wearing an apron and gloves, looking very plain. Perhaps seeing Dark had been browsing for quite a while, she came over and patiently explained, "This is a new variety of cat grass, snake grass, no need to worry about it biting, it's essentially a plant." Dark wasn't afraid, just a bit surprised, since there's snake grass, there wouldn't be. "Of course." The clerk lady brushed a curly strand of hair that fell to her eyelid and chuckled lightly, "We just got a new batch, with many types of animal-shaped cat grasses, would you like to go inside and take a look?" Chapter 50, Dark Demon's Mistake Triggers Consequences. Entering the secret room of the shop assistant. Dark opened his eyes and was utterly stunned. What kind of design genius modified the cat grass? The entire room was densely packed with dozens of pots of cat grass. Under the influence of special fragrances, various types of cat grass were drowsy. The most eye-catching among them was a giant goldfish grass. Goldfish grass. The scene of a fat goldfish with white scales and red fins growing on the grass was like a nightmare. If cat grass is a creation of earthly bliss, then that goldfish grass is a creation of the devil. Surrounding the goldfish grass were other bizarre new varieties of cat grass, such as snake grass, skunk grass, hedgehog grass, earthworm grass, eel grass, pigeon grass, abalone grass, mouse grass, octopus grass, spider grass, scorpion grass, lizard grass, and so on. Seeing Dark speechless with shock, the shop assistant finally asked, "So, do you see any variety you like?" Dark pressed his jaw back into place and after a while said, "That goldfish is quite something." "Really?" The shop assistant immediately exclaimed with joy, "I also think it's particularly special. The slightly dull, lifeless fish eyes, the forever gaping fish mouth, and the slightly chubbier feel than a regular goldfish. Wow, it's just adorable." "Dark, hey." The shop assistant continued talking non-stop. "Actually, these new varieties were specially modified by someone we hired. They're still in the testing phase, mainly to see how they are received. If the response is good." Dark interrupted, "I'm looking forward to your finished products. How about we go take a look at the cats?" The shop assistant paused. "Alright then." Back in the main shop, Dark continued to pick out cat grass, finally selecting a small kitten resembling an American Shorthair. Dark had no particular preference for cat breeds, he liked them all. Rather than him choosing the little kitten, it was more like the little kitten chose him by biting onto his finger. The way it clung to his hand with its two little paws and vigorously sucked on his finger instantly captured Dark's heart. Wrath -1, the effect was immediate. The accumulated wrath in his heart seemed to genuinely ease a bit because of its appearance. If depicted in a comic, his cheeks would definitely be round and chubby at this moment. The price of cat grass wasn't too high, just 50 credits for a pot, and a small bottle of cat juice was 1 credit, which could last 2 to 3 weeks. Dark paid the credits without hesitation and planned to take the insect tree and cat grass back to his dorm first. Passing by the forest cafe, he instinctively glanced inside and suddenly saw Emma arguing passionately with a senior. Both were holding the same book, their expressions serious to the point of anger. But judging from the expressions of the other seniors around, they didn't seem to mind. Instead, they were nodding frequently. "Is this a ladies' tea party?" Dark smacked his lips, feeling like this place was a den of demons. So he left without looking back. By the time he returned to the dorm, it was already 3 in the afternoon. He placed the cat grass on the spacious balcony, following the shop assistant's instructions to tie the straps extending from the pot to the railing to secure it. This way, the cat grass wouldn't run around. Once it got used to the environment here, even if you wanted to chase it out, it probably wouldn't leave. Then, Dark sprinkled a few grains of the special fragrance he bought from the shop assistant on top of the cat grass, and it soon became drowsy. After finishing these tasks, Dark moved the most important insect tree to his desk, comparing it with the descriptions in his books and carefully observing and recording. Once he confirmed his thoughts, he took out the brain dropper and the thought bottle, preparing to transfer the 2 drops of pride stored in the thought bottle into one of the insect tree's branches. The entire process took 10 minutes. The front end of the insect branch had a small hole like a worm's mouth. A slight injection of magic would open it, and it would close once the magic dissipated. Inside, there was a layer of liquid mucus membrane that could lock the thought substance inside. After being injected with the thought substance, the insect branch would harden and take on a strange heavy state, drooping like a ripe fruit. Once it drooped to a certain angle, it meant it was full. Dark judged that this insect branch could still store 1 more drop of pride, so he immediately used a dragonfly skimming water method to extract a bit of overflowing pride and inject it in. Thus, it now contained 3 drops. And Dark's pride index, plus the 1 point that had quietly increased this week, was now at 104 points. Overall, he had managed to control the various values of the 7 deadly sins quite well, entering a state of only slow growth. His next plan was to attempt to create a magic card infused with 10 points of pride. The planned creation time was next month, after Halloween. The 3 drops of pride, now, and the 2 drops he would extract next, would all be saved until the beginning of next month. During this period, he had to take good care of the insect tree and master more comprehensive knowledge of magic card creation. Additionally, the plan to collect flower cards needed to be put on the agenda. He glanced at his remaining credits and decided to make another trip to Traveler's Street. Of course, the first step was to move the insect tree to the balcony for some sunlight. Dark had only asked Diana and Rose about the information on flower cards, so his knowledge was very limited. But he roughly knew that these things were currently being circulated through 2 channels. One channel was giving, where someone would slip flower cards into the cracks of student dorm doors and so on, giving them away. Dark had previously received a white Datura flower card. He initially thought this was a mode similar to handing out flyers, but later found out that not everyone received this gift. It seemed the giver was selective. The other channel through which flower cards were circulated was Traveler's Street. It appeared that someone had sold a large number of flower cards to some shops on Traveler's Street, and those shops then gave the cards as gifts to students who came to shop. But again, not everyone received them. Dark currently knew that the only shop that clearly gave out flower cards was that quirky candy store. So he decided to go to the candy store first. Even if he couldn't find out anything, getting another card would be good. Returning to Traveler's Street, without a strong purpose, Dark's vision became much broader, and he noticed many details he hadn't seen before. The biggest treasure trove on Traveler's Street seemed not to be the shops, but the ubiquitous street stalls. The senior students setting up stalls on both sides of the street were selling all sorts of things. He even saw a nearly cheating, 90% complete semi-finished magic card. The academy rules stated that everyone could only use magic cards they made themselves. But where there's a will, there's a way. Rules are rigid, but people are flexible. As he walked, Dark suddenly felt a stir in his heart, noticing a senior selling transformation cards. Chapter 51, Dark demonized the Masquerade Ball. The popularity of the transformation series of magic cards at Street Marion Academy is exceptionally high. Students always hope to shed their old uniforms and change into their favorite outfits as soon as they enter Traveler's Street. There are no changing rooms at the entrances and exits of Traveler's Street. Without transformation cards, one would need to borrow a spot in a clothing store and bring a complete set of clothes, which is neither convenient nor stylish. However, the clothing stores on Traveler's Street only offer the latest trendy outfits and do not provide transformation cards. Therefore, if students want to obtain transformation cards, aside from making them themselves, they can only buy them from stalls set up by upperclassmen. But because making transformation cards is actually very complicated and doesn't earn many credits, there aren't many people selling them. Dark curiously stopped to look and found that the transformation cards sold at this stall were all uniformly themed around Halloween. Speaking of Halloween, it naturally brings to mind pumpkins, candies, ghosts, and masquerade balls. On Halloween Eve at Street Marion, there is an unprecedented masquerade ball that turns the entire castle into a stage. If you can catch the hidden ghosts during the masquerade ball, you can even exchange them for credit rewards. The one who catches the most ghosts will even receive a special title. As Halloween approaches, some experienced upperclassmen are already gearing up, and Dark occasionally hears them mention it in the common room. For first-year students, Halloween is a rare opportunity to earn a lot of credits. In short, on that day, no one will be wearing their uniforms. Dark certainly doesn't want to be the only exception. Since he happened to come across it, he thought of picking a transformation card to use, as it's not expensive anyway. After glancing at the price tags of 33 credits, 66 credits, and 88 credits, Dark didn't pay much attention. He squatted down and carefully looked through them for a while. Since it's a Halloween theme, most of the transformation cards here have high body coverage, though there are also some with extreme exposure like the Succubus series, but those are few. The more common ones are the Vampire series, Knight series, Monster series, and Palace series. There are others, but they lack uniformity. First year, Noble House? The upperclassman running the stall casually asked. Dark nodded politely. Hello, senior. The upperclassman smiled, quite pleased. I'm from Fool's House, but I'm still your senior. My name is Leon. If your classmates need transformation cards, they can come to Fool's House common room to find me. Dark asked curiously, does Fool's House common room have no curfew? Leon explained, of course it does, but our door lady is very hospitable. As long as you bring a gift, a small bottle of lubricant, she will open the door for you. Dark was surprised. Lubricant? Ahem. Leon looked away awkwardly. Anyway, that's how it is. Since you're a freshman from Noble House, I recommend this vampire set. It's the most popular series among Noble House students in the past. I even injected sweet blood plasma into the fangs, just input magic, and it will bleed. That's really something. Dark lowered his gaze and first flipped through the vampire sets, finding them all in traditional red and black colors. They looked good, but something seemed missing. He casually asked, do you have a Dark Lord set? Leon stiffened. We do have a hero set. By the way, I heard there's a student this year who claims to be the son of a hero, in your house? Dark, Knight House. Knight, huh? Leon sighed. I really hope he can wear my Kamen Rider set. Dark was startled. Kamen Rider set? Yes. Leon said proudly, he was a very famous hero when demons still existed. Using a special belt, just insert the transformation card into the belt, and you can transform into Kamen Rider, very similar to the current Sacred Gear series of magic cards. Do you know the Valkyrie Alvit? She's one of the holders of the 12 golden Sacred Gears. Dark certainly knew about the Valkyrie and had seen her complain about the Sacred Gear being too tight. The so-called Sacred Gear is very similar to Sacred Cloth. The 12 golden Sacred Gears are designed based on the 12 zodiac signs and can increase the user's strength and speed by hundreds of times. Only when wearing the Sacred Gear does the Valkyrie become the true Valkyrie. Dark couldn't help but become interested in the Kamen Rider set. But the more he looked, the more something felt off. This Kamen Rider set made by Leon looked more like a Beelzebub set? Forget it, better go with something more ordinary. These full-body sets really hinder mobility. If planning to make a big splash on Halloween, it's better to choose something lighter. For example, this tuxedo mask set looks pretty good. Tuxedo mask, black tuxedo, white glasses, deep red cape, white gloves, and a blood red rose. And it's only 33 credits. I'll take this one. Dark didn't dwell on it too much. If it doesn't work out, he can always change it later. Senior Leon wasn't upset that he chose the cheapest transformation card and even patiently explained how to inscribe the final formation on the transformation card. Dark felt he learned a lot. These 33 credits were well spent. But before leaving, Senior Leon suddenly called out to him, "By the way, here's a love fortune-telling card for you. Enjoy your youth." Dark, holding the love fortune-telling card given by Senior Leon, felt a bit unsettled. Senior Leon seems quite honest and is from Fool's House. He doesn't seem like the type to lie. So, are these love fortune-telling cards really distributed by Professor Cazal? Professor Cazal does have superb magic technology, but does he have this kind of taste? Dark carefully examined the still exquisite flower card in his hand, unable to imagine the goblin-blooded Professor Cazal making something like this. And according to Senior Leon, Professor Cazal only distributed the flower cards to them, instructing them to give them to people they found suitable. The number of flower cards wasn't actually many, and this was Senior Leon's last one. Dark couldn't figure out what common factor he and Diana shared. He wandered around the Gorky candy shop, bought some toffee, and indeed received another flower card. Then he went to the flower shop, jewelry store, clothing store. Some shops gave him a flower card, while others had already run out. After a full round, including the one from Senior Leon, he had collected 8 flower cards. Adding the one he already had, that made 9. 9 flower cards, quite a harvest. Dark left Traveler's Street before the sun set. As he walked out of the lakeside pavilion, he happened to pass by Vert and Robert. These two kids seemed to have overcome their previous rift and were playing together again. By the way, have they finished their homework? Dark wondered. Chapter 52, Dark Demon attempts to step out of the fog. As for whether Vert and Robert actually went to the library and finished their homework there, Dark felt only a slight curiosity and didn't intend to delve deeper. Holding 9 flower cards gave him more leeway in controlling lust, but if these flower cards were indeed made by Professor Cazal, he wanted to understand and master the method of making them. On one hand, it was to ensure a stable source of flower cards. On the other hand, he was very curious about why these flower cards could absorb lust. However, directly asking Professor Cazal about it would seem a bit too abrupt. After pondering for a moment, Dark quickly remembered that he still had a thought bottle to return. So he quickened his pace, planning to head back to his dorm to retrieve the thought bottle first. Friday evenings in the common room were usually the liveliest time. Students vented the academic stress accumulated over the week without worrying about homework or classes, since it was only Friday. Homework could be left for tomorrow, and classes were a concern for the day after. Even the Noble House common room was no exception. Dark weaved through the crowd, avoiding Diana's gaze, which seemed like she was hunting for mice, and successfully slipped into his dorm. The dorm was quiet, no different from when he had left. He closed the door, turned on the light, and walked to his desk. The thought bottle was in the desk drawer. He could grab it and leave. But just as he picked it up, he suddenly heard a meow. This made him turn and head towards the balcony. Has the cat grass woken up? He opened the door and looked down at the cat grass on the balcony. Then he fell silent. On the balcony, the cat grass was using its 2 paws to hold on to a dangling worm branch, its pink tongue licking and sucking the head of the worm branch. The worm branch, which should have hardened after being infused with 3 drops of pride, had somehow turned soft again. Wrath +1, unexpectedly, what he had earned back in the afternoon was returned in the evening. Meow. The cat grass, completely unaware that its owner was on the verge of losing his temper, put down the worm branch and trotted over to Dark. The cat grass's stem was long enough to allow it to run to Dark's feet. Dark squatted down, picked it up, and placed it on his lap, wondering whether to juice it or pet it tonight. Then he suddenly noticed a faint mark on the catgrass's forehead. The mark of pride? Dark frowned, and the anger in his heart quickly subsided. After repeatedly checking, he confirmed that it was indeed the mark of pride, but surprisingly, the catgrass didn't show the same pride as the little demon beast and Evie. Is it because it's a plant? Dark fell into deep thought, letting the catgrass suck on his finger. Speaking of which, how does a life form like catgrass exist? Dark's eyes flickered, and then he pulled out Pride Eye from his card pack. Magic summon. A dark golden orb flew out of Pride Eye and merged into the catgrass's head. But this magic card, which could induce pride, still had no effect. Let's check the library. Dark took a deep breath, put down the catgrass, and then moved the worm tree indoors. Once bitten, twice shy. Tomorrow, he would go to Traveler's Street to buy a guardrail to separate the worm tree and get some toys to keep the catgrass entertained. Dark made a note and realized he was getting busy again. Should I go to the library first, or see the professor? Better see the professor first. Going to the library at night isn't too late. Professor Kazal wasn't in his office. So Dark went to the laboratory. Sure enough, he found Professor Kazal making magic cards in the lab. But today, he wasn't working on Jack Pumpkin. Instead, he was making Mummy, with bandages and a mannequin. Dark thought about how to naturally steer the conversation and pulled out the white Datura flower card as he pushed the door open. Dark? Need to borrow the lab? The key to the next lab is in the second drawer of the office. Professor Kazal seemed very focused. Dark walked over and placed the thought bottle on the lab table, saying, Professor, I am here to return something. The thought bottle? Professor Kazal glanced back and smiled. You can keep it a bit longer. Dark, no, Professor. I've already bought a worm tree. He thought to first discuss emotions and thoughts before steering the conversation to the love fortune-telling cards. But when Professor Kazal saw the flower card in his hand, he immediately said, What, are you also interested in these flower cards? Dark's heart twitched, and he responded, Yes, Professor. I've been wondering if the so-called fortune-telling of these flower cards involves peering into the realm of thought. Professor Kazal was slightly taken aback, then smiled even more happily. He put down his work, removed his lab gloves, and smiled. I never expected your research into the realm of thought to have reached this level. With that, he turned back to the lab bench and reached out. Just as Dark heightened his guard, Professor Kazal pulled out a flower card from a card pack on the shelf, the card adorned with green roses. The simple and pure green roses carried blessings for eternal youth and hopes for everlasting love. A hint of tenderness flashed in Professor Kazal's eyes. Although this is just a small trick, there's something in it that even I can't see through. But as long as you cut off the magic, you can indeed separate from it. It's harmless. When Dark walked out of the lab, he had already given up on probing Professor Kazal. Although he couldn't confirm it, he had a feeling that Professor Kazal couldn't possibly be the real creator of the flower cards. But Senior Leon didn't seem to be lying. In fact, he had no reason to. So, someone disguised themselves as the professor to gain people's trust? Dark thought of transformation cards. If the design inside a transformation card was a skin suit that closely resembled a person, could it be used to impersonate anyone? This was both a hypothesis and an inference. Perhaps I should research transformation cards. Senior Pandora was playing with her catgrass at the counter, a chubby Totoro. It was a Totoro, not a chinchilla. She had used a small-range silencing card around the catgrass to ensure its meows wouldn't disturb the students in the library. Dark felt her behavior was quite abrupt, as she had never brought her catgrass to the library before. Is it bait? As he thought this, Dark's fingers had already unconsciously started scratching the Totoro's chin. This Totoro had a scale on its chin, soft and warm, not at all rough. Did you buy a catgrass? Senior Pandora narrowed her eyes. Dark, I bought a short-haired cat. Chapter 53. The dust raised by the gods of old sacrificed a bit of charm. Dark learned from Senior Pandora the location of books related to catgrass and quickly found a copy of 10,000 Mimicries in the Plant Kingdom in the library. The library was relatively quiet on Friday evening. Dark poured himself a cup of unscented black tea and began to read carefully. Mimicry refers to an ecological adaptation phenomenon in which one organism imitates another organism or non-living entity in form, behavior, or other characteristics, benefiting one or both parties. It is a special behavior formed through long-term evolution in nature. The biological phenomenon of catgrass originates from mimicry. A typical mimicry system consists of the mimic, the model, and the dupe. Taking catgrass as an example, the mimic is the catgrass itself. The model is the cat. And the dupe is the human. The 6 major organs of plants: roots, stems, leaves, flowers, fruits, and seeds. Dividing catgrass according to its plant structure, the part buried in the soil is the root. The tail is the stem. And the fur covering its body is the leaves? Dark was utterly stunned by this. Initially, he had assumed that the cat part of catgrass belonged to the fruit. But now, it seemed that wasn't the case. The cat fur was the leaves, while the body, limbs, and head were all part of the fleshy stem, similar to the main body of a cactus. As for the flowers and fruits, every spring and autumn, beautiful flowers bloom atop the catgrass's head. Once the petals fall, fruits form. And the seeds, naturally, are inside the fruits. Dark continued flipping through the book, gradually gaining a more detailed understanding of catgrass's ecology. When they are about to bloom, they transport most of the nutrients in their bodies to the top of their heads, promoting the growth of flower buds, which develop into buds, blossoms, and finally flowers. After pollination, fruits are produced. This is a very important process. Dark sketched the entire process in his notebook, then circled the top of the catgrass's head, convinced he had found the reason. To corroborate his thoughts, he consulted more materials. It wasn't until 9 p.m. that he borrowed a copy of The Fashion Guru and left the library. Senior Pandora wasn't always in the library. Most of the time, it was Miss Bella who was on duty. After returning to his dorm, Dark turned on the light, placed the borrowed book on the table, and then walked out to the balcony. Meow, the catgrass waddled over on its short legs. Dark crouched down, scratching its chin with one hand while carefully feeling the pride emblem on its head with the other. Sure enough, he discovered a tiny bud in the center of the pride emblem. Feeling the protrusion pressing against his fingertip, Dark suddenly felt a surge of excitement. What kind of fruit would the catgrass bear after absorbing pride? Speaking of fruits, there are countless potions made from various fruits, and even some magic spirit cards require special fruits as core materials. Before it successfully bears fruit, perhaps I can research related potions or magic spirit card creation. Because of his expectations for the catgrass, he once again felt the joy of cat addiction. The wrath accumulated in his heart also dissipated a little. After a while, he carried the catgrass to the bathroom, washed it, and placed it on the bedside table. He then read a bit more of The Fashion Guru before falling into a deep sleep. But Friday night wasn't over yet. Diana and Rose were still making noise in the common room. After the tea party, Emma was invited to the Magic Institute's book club and was pulling an all-nighter. Pandora, after calming her mood, was preparing for tomorrow's magic duel competition. Meanwhile, Vert and Robert, after half a night of wild fun, returned to their dorm very late. But not long after returning, Vert quietly opened the door, peeked into Robert's room, and then slipped out of the Night Institute's tower. Walking into the silent castle, Vert couldn't help but recall the events of the afternoon. Emma's final words had struck a chord. They had almost led him to make the wrong decision. Fortunately, Robert had suggested going to the library to study, giving him a glimmer of hope for change. Think of your departed parents. Although Vert had never met his parents, he had grown up listening to stories of heroes. Heroes had always been his aspiration. The day he learned from Headmaster Altair that he was the son of a hero, he had been overjoyed. But now, looking back at his actions over the past month, he felt like burying himself in a hole. When he first entered the library, that was exactly what he thought. He even set a small goal for himself, to surpass Dark Demon by the end of the semester. But 2 hours later, the difficult arithmetic homework crushed his resolve. After exchanging a glance with Robert, the two brothers agreed, balance work and play. Yes. They had learned from Dark's teachings. The sound of solitary footsteps echoed in the corridor. Vert drew out Forbidden Love, infused it with a bit of magic, and pink mist seeped out from the card.